Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Adrienne Jones. Adrienne Jessica Jones was a bright light in Mansfield in 1995. As a 16-year-old junior at Mansfield High School, she captivated everyone with her beauty, exceptional qualities, and impressive achievements. Adrienne was an outstanding student, consistently excelling in advanced honors courses and demonstrating a strong work ethic. She spent at least 2 hours each night studying to ensure her success, which earned her high grades. Her kindness, intelligence, and infectious spirit made her a role model and a beloved figure among her classmates and teachers. In addition to her academic prowess, Adrienne was a talented athlete. She was a dedicated member of the girls' soccer team, showcasing remarkable skill and dedication on the field. After graduating from Mansfield High School, Adrienne's dream was to become a veterinarian and help animals. After a game injury forced her to temporarily leave her team, Adrienne didn't give up on sports. Instead, she joined the girls' cross-country team, which allowed her to stay active and improve her fitness. She threw herself into the new challenge, working hard to get in shape. Her dedication paid off, and she soon became a key member of the cross-country team. In addition to her academic and athletic pursuits, Adrienne also held down a part-time job, working 20 hours a week at a local fast food restaurant, Golden Fried Chicken. Despite her busy schedule, Adrienne enjoyed being the center of attention, particularly from teenage boys in Mansfield. Her friends would even describe her as a bit of a flirt. She took great care in her appearance, spending at least 2 hours each day on her makeup to ensure she looked perfect. Adrienne, like many teenagers, often tested the limits set by her parents. Despite her good nature, her parents were particularly protective of her due to the changing environment in Mansfield, where crime was on the rise. They implemented a strict 9 p.m. curfew on weekends to ensure her safety, requiring her to provide proof of her activities, such as ticket stubs, if she wanted to stay out later. To prevent her from sneaking out, her father also nailed her bedroom window shut. Although Adrienne occasionally disobeyed her parents and left the house at night to meet her friends, on Sunday, December 3rd, 1995, she was given special permission to stay up late to talk to her boyfriend, Tracy Smith, who was out of town with his parents. During their phone conversation, Adrienne's mother overheard her mention that another call was coming in. When asked about the caller's identity, Adrienne said it was David from her cross-country team, who seemed upset about something. Adrienne's family started their day as usual the next morning, but her mother's concern grew when she heard Adrienne's alarm still going off in her bedroom. When she went to check on her, she discovered that Adrienne was missing, and her bed had not been slept in. Despite trying to stay calm, Adrienne's mother quickly became worried. She initially thought Adrienne might have gone for an early morning run, but this idea was quickly dismissed when she saw Adrienne's running shoes still on the floor. In the past, Adrienne had occasionally sneaked out at night to meet friends, but she had always returned home by morning, making her mother even more worried about her disappearance. Worried about Adrienne, her parents contacted the police. Unbeknownst to them, a shocking discovery was made on a farm several miles away. At around 7 a.m., on Seaton Road in Grand Prairie, Texas, a man was on his way to check his mailbox when he noticed that the gate to his property had been knocked down. Curious, he entered his farm and was met with an unsettling scene. Initially, the man thought he was looking at roadkill, but as he got closer, he realized it was a lifeless teenage girl lying on the ground. The man immediately called the police, who arrived to find a disturbing sight. The teenager had been shot execution style, with 2 bullet wounds on her left cheek and forehead. In addition to these gunshot wounds, her head had suffered severe injuries. Moreover, her arms and legs were covered in scrapes and bruises, indicating that she had run through the farm's barbed wire gate. A teenager's violent murder sparked a desperate investigation. The fact that she was found in her nightclothes suggested she had been preparing for bed when her life was brutally cut short. The execution-style killing led police to consider possible links to gang violence or drugs. After discovering the body on the farm, the Grand Prairie Police immediately alerted all nearby agencies, sending out a detailed description of the victim, including her age, height, weight, and other physical characteristics. They hoped that another agency might recognize the description and make a connection to a missing person. It wasn't long before the Mansfield police got in touch with Grand Prairie officers, having made a match. The Mansfield police identified the murdered teenager as Adrienne Jones. With the victim identified, the police had the heartbreaking task of informing Adrienne's parents about her tragic death. When they broke the news to her mother, she was overcome with grief. In the small town of Mansfield, news of Adrienne's murder spread quickly through her high school, leaving her classmates and friends devastated. Classes were interrupted as the news traveled through the halls, and students tearfully consoled one another. The town was on high alert following the discovery of Adrienne's body in a field, with rumors and theories circulating about her death. One theory was that Adrienne was involved in drugs, while others suspected a serial killer might be living among them. Adrienne's parents cooperated with the police, providing information about the last time they saw their daughter. Her mother specifically mentioned a phone call Adrienne had with her boyfriend, Tracy, and another teenager, David, who joined the call while Adrienne was on the phone. After midnight on the night of Adrienne's murder, one of her younger brothers heard a car engine outside their house. When he looked out the window, he saw a pickup truck driving away. The police were interested in identifying a person named David, who had called Adrienne that night. To learn more, they spoke with Adrienne's cross-country coach, who mentioned a team member named David Graham. However, the coach was surprised to hear that David had called Adrienne, as there was no indication that they had ever interacted before. David Graham was a 17-year-old high school student with big dreams. After watching his first air show, he decided he wanted to become an Air Force pilot. From then on, he dedicated himself to achieving his goal. David was well liked by his peers at Mansfield High School, where he was popular and charming. Many girls were attracted to him, but he was in a relationship with Diane Zamora, a high school senior who shared his desire to enter the military. Diane stood out from the crowd, actively pursuing her aspirations. After Adrienne's murder, the police interviewed David Graham, who acknowledged knowing her from their cross-country team, but claimed their relationship never went beyond friendship. When asked if he had contacted Adrienne on the night of her death, David denied it, saying he was home studying with his girlfriend, Diane Zamora. The police investigated David as a possible suspect, seeking information from Adrienne's friends to see if she had ever mentioned him. However, one of her closest friends, who was privy to Adrienne's secrets, said Adrienne had never discussed David with her. The police also checked Adrienne's phone book and found David's number was not listed, which further led them to believe he was not involved in her murder. As a result, they never administered a polygraph test to David and eventually cleared him as a suspect. The police investigated Adrienne's boyfriend, Tracy Smith, as a suspect in her murder. However, they cleared him after verifying his alibi, which placed him out of town with his family on the night of the murder. Tracy also passed a polygraph test, further supporting his innocence. During his police interview, Tracy suggested they investigate someone named Brian, whom Adrienne had mentioned was calling her on the night of her murder, while they were on the phone. The police identified the Brian in question as Brian McMillian, a local teenager. Their investigation into Brian McMillian revealed that he used to work at a pharmacy near the restaurant where Adrienne used to work. Brian had developed an obsession with Adrienne and would often visit the restaurant to catch a glimpse of her. Eventually, Adrienne grew tired of his constant presence and began hiding in the back whenever she saw him coming. The police questioned Brian McMillian about the murder of Adrienne Jones. At first, he claimed to have no knowledge of her, but later admitted to knowing her. When asked if he had talked to her on the night of her murder, Brian said he didn't remember. He explained that he had been drinking that night due to feelings of depression and loneliness. The officers also asked Brian if he had visited Adrian's house on the night of her murder, and he acknowledged that he might have done so. The police asked Brian's father if his son could take a lie detector test, but his father refused. 1 week later, the police raided Brian's house with guns, a decision made due to concerns that he might be armed. The police took this precaution to ensure everyone's safety, including their own. After Brian was arrested for Adrian's murder, many people came forward to show their support for him. Brian's friends said he was a gentle and non-violent person. His father also confirmed that Brian was at home all night when Adrian was killed and didn't leave. Despite this, Brian was held in jail for 3 weeks, missing Christmas and New Year's, while the investigation and legal proceedings continued. During this time, the district attorney's office asked Brian to take a polygraph test, which he passed successfully. After this, the district attorney's office had little evidence to link Brian to Adrian's murder, so they released him from custody. 9 months into the investigation, the police in Mansfield, Texas, finally got a breakthrough, and it came from Annapolis, Maryland, where Diane Zamora was attending the Naval Academy. Diane Zamora, a cadet at the Naval Academy, allegedly confessed to her fellow students that she and her boyfriend, David Graham, had murdered a girl named Adrian Jones in Mansfield, Texas. The Mansfield police traveled to Annapolis, Maryland, to interview Diane, but she denied making any such admission. The Naval Academy suspended Diane and sent her home pending an investigation. Since Diane was uncooperative, the police went to the Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs, Colorado, to question David. Initially, David claimed he didn't know why Diane would fabricate a story about killing Adrian Jones. However, during the interview, David began to crack and asked to write a statement. In a 4.5-page confession letter, David detailed how he and Diane planned and carried out the murder of Adrian Jones, including a cross-country event in November 1995, where he offered to drive Adrian home. During the ride, David and Adrian parked in an elementary school parking lot and had sex. Afterwards, David felt overwhelmed with guilt because he loved his girlfriend Diane deeply and knew that his infidelity would cause her immense pain. One evening, while David was helping Diane study for her SATs, they got into an argument. Unable to keep his secret any longer, David broke down in tears and confessed his infidelity to Diane. He told her that he had hooked up with Adrian, which shattered Diane's heart and left her feeling deeply hurt and angry. Diane was inconsolable and lashed out at David, screaming and arguing with him. She was so angry that she wished he were dead, and she felt intense hatred towards Adrian. Diane's emotions were too much to handle, and she struggled to come to terms with what had happened. David pleaded with Diane, promising to do whatever it took to save their relationship. David and Diane decided that the only way to repair their relationship was to kill Adrian. In his confession letter, David admitted that on December 3rd, he called Adrian Jones and asked her to secretly leave her house late at night to meet with him. He specifically asked Adrian to keep their meeting private and not tell anyone else about it. David originally planned to lure Adrian into a trap, kill her by breaking her neck, and then dispose of her body in a lake. On the agreed night at 2:30 a.m., David picked up Adrian in his car while Diane hid in the hatchback. They drove to a secluded spot 10 miles out of town, turning off the highway onto Satan Road. David stopped the car, and Adrian subtly adjusted her seat, creating the impression they were about to be intimate. Unbeknownst to Adrian, David had secretly signaled for Diane to emerge from the trunk. Diane came out of the rear of the vehicle and approached the front. Diane confronted Adrian, who was seated in the passenger seat. Diane then hit Adrian on the head with a weight from David's gym set. Despite being severely injured, Adrienne managed to escape by crawling out of the car window. David and Diane panicked, and David grabbed his 9mm Makarov weapon to chase after Adrienne. Adrienne was severely injured and collapsed in a nearby field due to her head wound. When David caught up to her, he shot her twice and then returned to his car. After Adrienne died, David and his accomplice Diane exchanged "I love you" as their first words to each other. The police later questioned Diane, who had a statement prepared to confess her involvement. David and Diane were arrested and charged with capital murder. Although they initially confessed, they later retracted their statements, with David claiming Diane acted alone and Diane alleging David committed the crime by himself. In 1998, Adrienne's mother requested that the death penalty be removed as a possible sentence for David and Diane. Diane's trial began in February 1998. Multiple witnesses testified that Diane showed no remorse for killing Adrienne. The jury found Diane guilty of capital murder, resulting in an automatic life imprisonment sentence, with the possibility of parole in 40 years. David Graham was convicted of murdering Adrienne Jones and received a life sentence, with the possibility of parole in 40 years. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The incredible case of Michelle Whitaker. Michelle Laurel Whitaker was born on August 16, 1969, as the fourth of 5 children to her parents. According to her mom, Laura Andrews, Michelle was extremely close to her entire family. However, this changed when they moved from Illinois to Gastonia, North Carolina. And Michelle's once happy demeanor began to fade. As she entered her teenage years, Michelle and her mom began to clash frequently, primarily due to her mom's strictness. After graduating from high school, Michelle got married, but the union lasted less than a year. Her inexperience and youth made it difficult for her to handle the problems her partner created. The abusive treatment by her husband marked the beginning of a prolonged and distressing period in Michelle's life. Those close to her believe this tumultuous period led to her later struggles. At the time, she struggled to cope and made poor choices as a result. After her divorce, Michelle's family moved to Spartanburg, South Carolina. By the time she was 30, Michelle was struggling with alcohol addiction and had already had 3 failed marriages. She was working part-time as a waitress and was barely getting by. One evening in 1999, Michelle met a man named David after her shift ended, and he offered to give her a ride home. Michelle accepted, but soon regretted her decision. Instead of taking her home, David took her to a secluded area where he assaulted her and forced her into intimate contact. He was arrested a year later, pleaded guilty to assault and battery, and received an 8-year prison sentence. Just before she disappeared, Michelle was arrested for driving under the influence of alcohol. Michelle's parents decided it was time to take drastic measures. They contacted the police and asked them to hold Michelle in custody until a spot in a rehabilitation center became available. Although it was a difficult decision, her parents felt it was the only way to help Michelle in her situation. However, Michelle became extremely upset by this, and from that point on, her relationship with her mother significantly deteriorated. Unfortunately, Michelle was mistakenly released from jail without receiving the court-ordered treatment for her substance and alcohol abuse. On August 5, 2002, Michelle had an argument with her mother and stormed out of the house in a bad mood. 3 days later, the man she was staying with contacted her mother, Laura Andrews, to inform her that he couldn't find Michelle after they had had an argument. This is how Laura learned of her daughter's disappearance. Laura immediately sought help from a friend who worked at the local police station. But the police, familiar with Michelle's lifestyle, advised her to wait a little longer, assuring her that Michelle would likely show up on her own. However, 2 weeks passed and Michelle failed to return home. On August 21, 2002, Laura filed an official missing persons report, and local law enforcement began investigating Michelle Whitaker's disappearance. During their investigation, they discovered the last place Michelle was spotted, a truck stop. This information came from a local resident named Doug, who had met Michelle by chance on the street the day before she disappeared. Doug recounted that he had stopped his motorcycle outside a bar where Michelle was sitting and struck up a conversation with her. Michelle told him that she had had a fight with her boyfriend and he had thrown her out of the house. Later that evening, they visited 2 bars together, playing a few games of billiards at one of them. They then took a ride on Doug's motorcycle until dawn, after which they went to his house. Thus, it was revealed that Michelle Whitaker had spent her last evening visiting local bars, and Doug was the last person to have seen her alive. This made Doug the prime suspect in Michelle's disappearance. According to his testimony, Michelle had planned to go to Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, a resort city on the Atlantic coast, where she hoped to earn good money working in local bars and restaurants. Doug claimed that he dropped Michelle off at a truck stop, but only after giving her some clothes, including a t-shirt and shorts, and some money to buy coffee and newspapers. He said he wished her good luck before leaving. To verify Doug's story, the police gave him a lie detector test, which he passed. They also tested the man Michelle had been staying with before she vanished, but found no evidence to suggest he was involved in her disappearance. The police began to consider the possibility that Michelle had actually gone to Myrtle Beach, which is approximately 250 miles from Spartanburg. A few more weeks went by, but there was still no sign of Michelle. Her family and friends were growing increasingly anxious. Despite her anger and resentment towards her parents, they couldn't bring themselves to believe she would abandon her family and go into hiding. Michelle's prolonged disappearance made the local sheriff question her motives. When people travel for extended periods, they typically take some personal belongings with them, but Michelle had left with almost nothing. Moreover, she had a beloved pet dog to which she was deeply attached. Every detective interviewed agreed that Michelle would never willingly abandon her dog. In the meantime, Michelle's parents began driving around the neighborhood, hoping to find any clue that might lead them to their daughter. After receiving multiple tips that Michelle had been spotted on a beach in North Carolina, they headed there immediately. They spent 3 days searching for her, posting flyers and talking to locals, but their efforts ultimately proved fruitless. After 6 months of unsuccessful searches, Laura Andrews started questioning whether her behavior towards her daughter had been right. She had witnessed her daughter's downward spiral and couldn't just stand by. Laura wanted to protect her in any way possible. Additionally, she suspected that the 1999 brutal attack Michelle suffered might have contributed to her disappearance. Laura couldn't forgive herself for the hurtful words she spoke to Michelle after the attack, despite the assault being a terrible act by a stranger. Laura initially blamed Michelle for taking a destructive path and causing harm to herself, which only damaged Michelle's self-esteem further with her words. From the sheriff's office, it was assumed Michelle had motives to escape due to her reputation. Detectives thought she'd eventually be arrested, but a year passed with no results. The police were alarmed that Michelle left no digital traces, which wasn't a good sign. Both police and family wondered if Michelle was a crime victim, possibly falling prey to a truck driver, but this theory remained unsubstantiated. 2 more years passed with no leads. On the 3rd anniversary of Michelle's disappearance, after police and Laura Andrews visited the truck stop where Michelle was last seen, local TV stations revisited the story. Just days after Michelle's story aired on TV news, the Spartanburg County Sheriff's Office received a strange letter. The anonymous letter, handwritten on a small sheet of paper, claimed to reveal the location of Michelle Whitaker's body. A crude, homemade map accompanied the letter, pinpointing the exact spot. Despite its amateurish appearance, the letter was well written and proper, lending it an air of credibility. The sheriff, accompanied by search dogs, embarked on a search of a rural area 25 miles from where Michelle was last seen. This development came 3 years after her disappearance, and her family was torn between despair and hope. Some had reluctantly accepted that Michelle might be dead, while others clung to the possibility that she was alive and safe. The search dogs were unable to detect any scent, and the operation was eventually called off. Although relieved that no body was found, the investigators remained perplexed by the letter. A handwriting analysis and DNA evidence from the envelope suggested that the author was a woman, but her identity remained unknown. In 2006, Michelle's parents relocated to Rock Hill, South Carolina, which is 65 miles from Spartanburg. A year later, on the 5th anniversary of Michelle's disappearance, the whole family gathered at the church. Michelle's mother, Laura Andrews, did not want to treat the gathering as a memorial service because Michelle's body had not been found, and there was still a faint hope that she might be alive. Another year passed, and Detective William Gary took over the investigation of Michelle's disappearance. At the time, he was handling a dozen unsolved cases, including Michelle's. Since many years had gone by without any evidence that Michelle was still alive, her case was considered a felony. The lack of evidence led the investigators to believe that something tragic had likely occurred. As the 6th anniversary of Michelle's disappearance approached, on August 4, 2008, Detective Gary received a call from a woman claiming to know Michelle's whereabouts. She said Michelle was living in Oregon. The woman had seen Michelle's file on an episode of Forensic Files and a website created by Laura, which helped her recognize Michelle as a woman who had been living with friends for 6 years, unaware that her family had been searching for her. After receiving the mysterious message, the investigators were understandably cautious. Detective William Gary, for evidence, requested that the woman send a photo of Michelle. He then showed the picture to Detective Wood, who had previously worked on the case and immediately recognized her. Promptly, an Oregon State police officer was dispatched to the address in question to confirm Michelle's identity. In a remarkable coincidence, on August 5, 2008, exactly 6 years after Michelle's argument with her mother and her departure from home, Detective Laura Andrews received a call informing her that her daughter had been found alive. Laura struggled to process the news, and only after hanging up the phone did a flood of questions arise. Where is she? How is she? And what had she been doing all this time? Although the news was welcome, a family reunion was not possible at this point. The police were bound to respect Michelle's privacy and could not disclose her whereabouts to her parents. It was up to Michelle to initiate contact with her family. The detectives tried to persuade Michelle to talk to her relatives, if only to alleviate their concerns. The next evening, Michelle phoned her mother. 2 weeks later, at Atlanta Airport, Michelle and her family had a long overdue reunion. She confessed that she was exhausted from her former way of life. After her argument with her mom, Michelle came to a realization. She believed her family would be better off without her around. Initially, when Doug dropped her off at the truck stop, Michelle had planned to head to Myrtle Beach to find work. But instead, she hitchhiked and ended up in Las Vegas, then California, and eventually Oregon. Michelle offered apologies to both her family and the police, who had invested considerable time and resources into searching for her over the past 6 years. She had been living under her real name, and it never occurred to her that anyone was still looking for her. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Stacy Smith. Born on September 21, 1977, Stacy Ann Smith was known to her family and friends as a beautiful and outgoing person. During her school days, she was a popular cheerleader who attracted a lot of male attention. After graduating, she met Stephen, the love of her life, and they decided to spend the rest of their lives together. In June 2002, they welcomed a daughter named Mackenzie, and soon after, they got married, believing their happiness would last forever. 4 years later, Stacy and Stephen had a son named Landon. However, their relationship began to deteriorate, and they eventually broke up in 2009. At the time, Landon was 3 years old, and Mackenzie was 7. The family lived in St. Albans, West Virginia. After her divorce, Stacy was determined to make her children happy. One day, she ran into an old acquaintance, Brent, on the street. They had attended high school together, and Brent had had a crush on her back then, although she didn't feel the same way. However, this chance encounter sparked a romance between them. As they got to know each other better, Stacy's ex-husband, Stephen, became aware of her new relationship. He would often see Stacy and Brent together when he came to pick up the kids for the weekend. Initially, Brent got along great with Stacy's children, which made her happy. However, as time went on, their relationship began to experience some turbulence. They started to have frequent arguments, mostly due to Brent's jealousy. He tried to exert control over certain aspects of her life, such as wanting to know who she was talking to on the phone. Despite their breakups, they would eventually reunite after calming down. On Christmas Eve in 2009, Stacy moved into a new home with her kids. Her cousin Timothy and boyfriend Brent lent a hand in decorating the house for Christmas and creating a warm ambience. A few days later, on December 28, 2009, Stacy's father John Paul attempted to reach his daughter by phone but received no response. As the hours ticked by with no answer or callback from Stacy, John grew concerned and decided to investigate. He got in the car and drove to the house where Stacy lived with her kids, a place they had occupied for only a few days before Christmas, and he wanted to check on their well-being. When John arrived at the house, everything seemed normal. He knocked on the front door and called out his daughter's name, but there was no response. The door was locked, so he looked through the window and spotted 3-year-old Landon inside. John caught Landon's attention and asked where his mom Stacy was. Landon replied that she was asleep. John's instincts told him something was off. Stacy wasn't a heavy sleeper and would have woken up from the knocking on the door. John instructed Landon how to open the door, and once inside, he told the boy to wait in the living room while he checked on Stacy. As John entered the kitchen, he was met with a horrific scene. Stacy's body lay lifeless on the floor, surrounded by bloodstains. The same gruesome sight extended into Stacy's bedroom. John instantly dialed 911 and requested assistance. The police thoroughly searched the house to ensure the perpetrator was not concealed inside. It was evident that Stacy's death was not accidental. The woman had succumbed to a fatal neck stab wound. A message on one of the walls caught the detective's attention immediately. The individual who penned it accused Stacy of being unfaithful. The message consisted of only 2 words, cheating, and a second word starting with W. It was particularly heartbreaking that Landon spent most of the day by himself while his mother lay dead. Forensic analysis revealed the boy's bloody footprints next to Stacy's body, indicating he had approached his mother, likely attempting to rouse her. At just 3 years old, he probably didn't comprehend that his mother wasn't simply sleeping. The police collected all possible evidence from the house, including cigarette butts and beer cans, which could provide DNA clues. However, the writing on the wall was the most intriguing piece of evidence for the investigators. They needed to identify who wrote it and why. Given the crime's motive was likely jealousy, and the extreme cruelty suggested a revenge attack, the perpetrator could be someone Stacy knew and trusted. There were no signs of forced entry, implying Stacy had let the killer into her home. The police also found Stacy's car and car keys missing, as well as her phone and the murder weapon. They issued a description of the car to all patrolmen, suspecting the criminal might have used it to flee the scene. Stacy's tragic death was devastating for her loved ones, especially her children, who had to come to terms with never seeing their mother again. Psychologists spoke with Landon to see if he had witnessed anything unusual, but the boy couldn't assist the police. Upon waking, he found his mother on the floor. Thinking she was asleep, he tried to rouse her, but she didn't respond. The prime suspect in this crime could be someone who believed Stacy had been unfaithful to them. Initially, there were two main suspects: Stacy's boyfriend, Brent, and her ex-husband, Stephen. Stephen might still have had strong feelings for Stacy, and despite their divorce, he might have been angry that she had moved on to another man. Brent, on the other hand, was known to be jealous, which could have led him to suspect Stacy of cheating. When investigating cases like this, detectives must consider all possible scenarios, no matter how unlikely they may seem at first. They were also looking into the possibility of a secret admirer or unknown romantic interest that even Stacy's closest friends and family might not have been aware of. As a young and attractive doctor's assistant, Stacy would have naturally attracted attention from men. While patrol officers were scouring the streets for Stacy's vehicle, investigators conducted interviews with her family members. Following these conversations, Stacy's boyfriend, Brent, emerged as the prime suspect. Her family and friends were well aware that Brent had a jealous streak and frequently became violent when he suspected Stacy was in contact with others. He had a volatile temper, prone to outbursts over trivial matters, which had led Stacy to sever communication with him on multiple occasions. Given this profile, the detectives pinpointed Brent as a key person of interest and decided to track him down for questioning. Their goal was to determine if he had any involvement in the crime and to confirm his whereabouts at the time of Stacy's death, while also observing his reactions to their inquiries. Brent was still at his country house before heading out, making it easy to track him down. Investigators secured a search warrant and found him in his garage when they arrived. Although he became nervous at the sight of the police, this didn't necessarily imply anything, as many people get anxious when officers show up at their doorstep. The investigators informed Brent of the search warrant for his home and that it was related to the investigation into Stacy Smith's death. Brent appeared to be genuinely shocked by the news and seemed devastated by grief. But the question was this just an act? The investigators aimed to find out when they took him to the police station for further questioning. Brent's behavior during the interrogation only heightened the police's suspicions about him. He admitted that his relationship with Stacy was unstable and marked by frequent arguments. According to Brent, their last altercation occurred on the day before her death. He told investigators that Stacy had cheated on him with one of his friends, which had severely damaged their relationship. Although some time had passed since then, the betrayal still lingered. Brent claimed that on December 27th, he had gone home after they quarreled, but returned to Stacy's house a couple of hours later. They had a calm conversation, and intimacy ensued. He left around 2 a.m. when Stacy's son Landon and her cousin Timothy were asleep in the house. Brent maintained that there were no issues between him and Stacy when he departed, and he was unaware of her death until the police informed him. However, no one could corroborate his alibi, which led investigators to question his story. As a result, they asked Brent to take a polygraph test to gauge his responses. After initial hesitation, Brent agreed to the test, hoping to clear his name. He passed the test without any issues. Initially, the police considered removing him from the list of suspects, but during the polygraph test, they noticed a small red spot on Brent's shirt that resembled dried blood. When questioned, Brent attributed the spot to a minor injury he had sustained the day before, claiming it was his own blood. However, only an expert examination could confirm or refute this statement. To verify Brent's testimony, the detectives decided to interview Stacy's cousin, Timothy, assuming Brent was telling the truth. As the last person to see Stacy alive, Timothy was a crucial witness. However, a major obstacle emerged. Timothy had vanished. Following the news of Stacy's death, the entire family gathered, but Timothy was nowhere to be found. He didn't answer his phone, and his whereabouts remained a mystery. This concerned both the family and the police, particularly given Timothy's history of substance abuse and potential debts. They feared that someone he owed money to might have taken revenge, but something had gone terribly wrong. Another stage has been added to the ongoing investigation. As previously noted, Stephen, Stacy's ex-husband, was one of the initial suspects in the crime. It's possible that Stephen was enraged by Stacy's relationship with Brent, even before their divorce was finalized. Although they were no longer living together, Stacy's actions may have offended Stephen, prompting him to commit the crime and leave a provocative message on the wall. Furthermore, one of Stephen's possible motives could have been related to his children, whom he only saw on weekends, and perhaps he wanted full-time custody. When Stephen arrived at the police station for questioning, he remained calm and composed, denying any involvement in Stacy's death. He claimed he would never harm the mother of his children. According to Stephen, his divorce from Stacy did not lead to animosity between them. In fact, he shared the same suspicion as her family, that Brent was responsible for the crime. Stephen provided an alibi for the night of the crime, which the police quickly verified, ruling him out as a suspect. Meanwhile, investigators searched for Stacy's car, only to discover that the vehicle in question was actually owned by her boss, Dr. William Casto. This raised the possibility of another romantic interest in Stacy's life. Further investigation revealed a romantic relationship between Stacy and Dr. Casto. Colleagues reported that the two were very close, and at some point, Dr. Casto had even given Stacy a car as a gift. This new information added Dr. Casto to the list of potential suspects, with the police considering the possibility that he might have discovered Stacy's relationship with Brent and taken drastic action. With all this in mind, the detective began searching for Dr. Casto, who didn't try to hide and went about his daily routine. After learning about Stacy's death and that the investigators wanted to speak with him, William Casto voluntarily went to the police station. During the interrogation, he admitted to having an intimate relationship with Stacy and giving her the car. According to him, they had been in a consensual relationship for several years before her death, and he would often help her with her problems. Casto denied any involvement in the crime, stating he had no motive to harm Stacy. He was forthcoming with the investigators, providing them with his alibi for the night of the crime. This solid alibi allowed him to be ruled out as a suspect. Now that Casto was no longer a suspect, the police still needed to identify who had written the offensive message in Stacy's house, and who she had offended so deeply. Was there another man in her life? The police had to find answers to these questions. Meanwhile, the police used GPS tracking technology to locate Stacy's car, which they found in a deserted parking lot, about 5 miles from her house. Investigators believed the vehicle held the key to solving the case. Patrol cars were dispatched to the location, and the car was towed to the police parking lot for forensic examination. Although Stacy's credit cards and personal belongings were found inside, there was no knife linked to the crime or any other evidence. A surprising development emerged in the investigation when the police looked into Timothy's background, Stacy's missing cousin. It turned out that he had a criminal history, including a previous conviction for a sexual offense and theft. According to the charges, Timothy had molested a girl, but he claimed she had lied about her age, and he thought she was above the legal age limit. Timothy served time in prison for this offense and was required to register as a sex offender, but he failed to do so. Timothy Ray Sutherland contacted the police 2 days after Stacy's death, claiming to be staying at a local motel and denying any involvement in her murder. However, he was wanted for arrest due to his failure to register as a sex offender. When the police arrived at the motel, Timothy had escaped, but his girlfriend told them he was hiding in an abandoned trailer on the other side of town. He was arrested on December 30th, 2009, and taken to the police station for questioning. During the interrogation, investigators asked Timothy to corroborate Brent's alibi, which was that he had stayed at Stacy's house with her and her son. Timothy confessed to being at his cousin's house that night, where Brent and Stacy had gotten into a fight. Timothy's cousin accused Brent of killing Stacy, stating that Brent was not a good person and did not care about or respect Stacy. When questioned about why he had left the crime scene, Timothy explained that he was afraid of being arrested due to his unregistered sex offender status. In essence, Timothy accused Brent of Stacy's murder. However, after receiving the lab report, these allegations became less credible. The dried blood on Brent's shirt was found to be his own, not Stacy's. As a result, the police could not find any evidence linking Brent to the crime. Consequently, the circle of suspects narrowed to focus on Timothy and Landon, who were the only ones remaining in the house when Brent left. Clearly, 3-year-old Landon could not have committed this crime and written the offensive message on the wall, which meant Timothy was hiding something. The investigators noticed dried blood stains on Timothy's jeans and sent all his clothes to the lab for analysis. Despite this, he continued to insist that Brent was responsible for Stacy's death. The investigators persisted in questioning him, and eventually, he told the truth. Timothy Sutherland let Brent yell at his cousin, Stacy Smith, and she always forgave him. One night, they had a fight in front of Timothy, and Brent stormed off. But a few hours later, Brent came back, and Stacy forgave him yet again. Timothy was angry about this and led Brent into Stacy's bedroom, where it was clear they were making up. After Brent left, Timothy went to Stacy's bedroom to talk to her. The court documents describe what happened next, without going into unnecessary detail. In 2009, Timothy Sutherland was staying with his cousin, Stacy Smith, in St. Albans, West Virginia. On December 28, 2009, Timothy got into an argument with Stacy in her bedroom. When Stacy called him a junkie, Timothy became enraged at being accused of being a drug addict. He left the bedroom, went to the kitchen to smoke a cigarette, and then returned with a butcher knife. He stabbed Stacy in the neck as she lay on the bed, then fled the scene. Mr. Sutherland took possession of Miss Smith's personal belongings, including her cell phone, credit card, money, and car keys. Additionally, he vandalized a living room wall in the house by writing the word "cheating" on it. According to Timothy, after he injured Stacy, she was able to get out of bed and take a few more steps. At the time, her son was asleep in another room, and her daughter was staying overnight with friends. As Timothy recounted these events to the detectives, he became emotional and appeared genuinely remorseful. He also revealed the location of the murder weapon, stating that he had thrown the knife he used to kill Stacy out of the car window near her house. The police later found the knife at the exact location Timothy specified. Furthermore, laboratory analysis revealed that Timothy's jeans were stained with Stacy's blood. When questioned about the wall writings, he claimed he wanted to frame Stacy's boyfriend, Brent, as the prime suspect in her murder. Given their frequent arguments, he hoped people would assume Brent had killed her out of jealousy. However, Brent suspected there was more to it. He believed Timothy harbored romantic feelings for his cousin and was envious of her. That fateful night, Timothy sat in the living room armchair, overhearing Brent and Stacy's activities in the bedroom. Maybe his jealousy boiled over, causing him to lose control and commit an irreparable act. The police explored the possibility that Timothy might have attempted to coerce Stacy into a romantic encounter after Brent left, but they found no concrete evidence to support this theory. With only 2 people aware of what transpired that night, and one of them deceased, the truth remained elusive. Although Timothy Sutherland initially confessed to the crime during his interrogation, he later claimed innocence at his first court hearing in 2010. Despite this, the authorities had gathered sufficient evidence to secure a conviction. The central issue was whether the jury would believe the prosecutor's claim that the crime was premeditated, or the defense lawyer's argument that Timothy committed the crime in a fit of passion. The series of events leading up to the crime suggested that Timothy was fully aware of his actions. He had an argument with Stacy, left her bedroom, went to the kitchen to smoke a cigarette, and then returned with a knife. On March 18, 2011, the jury delivered a guilty verdict, and Timothy Ray Sutherland was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. 2 years later, in 2013, he attempted to appeal the verdict, but was unsuccessful. Hello friends. Welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Savannah Gold. In 2017, Sherry's world was turned upside down in Florida when her daughter Savannah failed to show up for work at the restaurant where she was employed. Sherry was unaware that this ordinary day would be the last time she'd see Savannah. An hour later, the restaurant called Sherry to inform her that Savannah hadn't arrived for her shift, which was unusual since she had never missed work before. However, the events that unfolded after that call were even more bizarre. When Savannah's father received a message on her behalf, riddled with spelling mistakes and lacking punctuation, he instantly knew it wasn't his 21-year-old daughter who had written it. The impersonator claimed Savannah had met an amazing guy, fallen in love, and decided to elope with him, promising to call later. Savannah's father, Daniel Gold, carefully read the text message, paying close attention to its content. He knew his daughter well and was convinced that running away with her boyfriend was out of character for her. While Daniel studied his phone screen, trying to make sense of the message, Savannah's older brother Chris received a similar text saying she was leaving with her boyfriend and that she was okay. Daniel's instincts told him something was wrong, so he immediately started calling his daughter's phone, only to find it turned off. Savannah Page Gold was born on April 26, 1996, to Daniel and Sherry Gold. She lived with her parents and older brother Chris in Jacksonville, Florida. Savannah enjoyed various hobbies, including playing lacrosse, drawing, and dancing. Those close to her believed she embodied her last name, being a loving, kind, and caring person always willing to help others. After graduating from high school, Savannah turned down a college scholarship for art and design to care for her mother, Sherry, who had been diagnosed with cancer and was undergoing chemotherapy. To support her mother, Savannah took on household responsibilities and also worked as a waiter at Bonefish Grill, a restaurant. By the summer of 2017, she had been working at the restaurant for 2 years. On August 2nd, Savannah left for work at around 5 p.m., wearing her uniform, as her shift was scheduled to start at 5:30 p.m. However, less than an hour later, Sherry received a call from the restaurant asking why Savannah had not shown up for work. This surprised Sherry, as she knew her daughter was responsible and had seen her leave the house in her uniform, indicating that she had indeed gone to work. After Savannah's father received a suspicious phone call, her father and brother started getting strange messages that they didn't think were from her. They suspected someone was impersonating Savannah. Before this, Savannah's father had tried to contact the police, but he couldn't reach his daughter. She was reported missing, and the police launched a search for her. Since sending those messages, Savannah's phone and social media accounts have been inactive. The police first went to the establishment where she worked to investigate. They found her unlocked car in the parking lot, about 120 yards from the restaurant entrance. Her personal documents, wallet, cards, cash, and other valuable items were still inside the car. It was clear to the police that the story about Savannah running away with her lover was a lie. If Savannah had planned to disappear, she would have taken her documents and bank cards with her to avoid being traced. It didn't make sense that she would leave them behind in her car. Initially, there were no signs of a struggle or crime near or inside the car, except for the flat left front tire. Forensic experts were called to investigate, and detectives visited the restaurant to speak with Savannah's co-workers. However, they all claimed that Savannah hadn't come to work that day and that no one had seen her. The presence of Savannah's car, parked 120 yards from the restaurant, led detectives to suspect that something might have happened to her after she arrived at work. They began canvassing local establishments, particularly those with surveillance cameras, to review the footage and identify the moment Savannah parked her car. Although the image quality was poor, the police were able to see from the footage that Savannah parked her car got out, and walked to a nearby silver Chevrolet Malibu sedan. For 14 minutes, she stood next to the driver's door, talking to the person behind the wheel. She then opened the back door and got in, and the driver followed suit. The police watched as the car shook, and the back doors swung open 3 times before being closed again. Officers suspected that a fight had broken out inside the car between Savannah and the Chevrolet's owner. Shortly after, the man exited the car, approached Savannah's vehicle, opened the driver's door, and removed something from inside. He then punctured the front left tire, got back into his vehicle, and drove away without Savannah ever getting out. The owner of the Chevrolet Malibu was quickly identified as Lee Rodarte, a 28-year-old manager and chef at the restaurant where Savannah worked. He had helped distribute flyers with Savannah's picture during the police investigation and claimed not to have seen her for about 3 weeks, citing their different work shifts. However, when detectives re-interviewed restaurant employees, they discovered that Lee and Savannah's relationship went beyond a professional one. Several people came forward to reveal that the two had met secretly after hours and were romantically involved, a fact that Lee had failed to disclose to the police. On August 5th, during his work shift, Rodarte was arrested and taken to the police station for questioning. When he arrived, he immediately warned the detectives that he struggled with reading and writing. In response, they thoroughly explained his rights, including his right to an attorney and the fact that anything he said could be used against him in court. Rodarte then admitted that he had previously lied to the police when they interviewed the restaurant staff, saying he hadn't seen Savannah in a long time. In reality, he had seen her on the day she went missing, but he was afraid that if he told the truth, he would become a suspect in her disappearance, which is why he had lied. Lee said he had met Savannah about 2 years ago when she started working at the restaurant. However, their socializing outside of work began around 8 months ago. At that time, he was already in a relationship with someone named Chelsea. When Chelsea discovered he had been unfaithful to her, she ended their relationship. Rodarte claims he dated Savannah for 3 months before she started using illegal drugs, which led him to end their relationship and reunite with Chelsea. Following the breakup, Rodarte and Savannah allegedly agreed to maintain a professional relationship, limited to their work at the restaurant, as per company policy, prohibiting romantic relationships among employees. Rodarte also states that Savannah had disclosed their intimate relationship to other waiters, with the intention of getting him fired. Lee last saw Savannah on a Wednesday afternoon. He drove to the mall on August 2nd to talk to her and persuade her not to spread rumors about their relationship, as he feared losing his job at the restaurant where he had worked for 5 years. When he met her, Savannah had just taken a strong substance and was panicking, so she asked if she could sit in his car for a bit. Once inside, Lee demanded that she stop telling people they were still dating. Savannah asked him to join her in the back seat so they could talk. After moving to the back seat, Lee again asked Savannah to stop spreading rumors, but she refused, saying she would do as she pleased. This response infuriated Lee, who then got out, slashed a tire on Savannah's car, and returned. When Savannah asked why he had done it, Lee admitted he was upset and angry. Next, as Rodarte claimed, Savannah exited his vehicle and headed towards the mall entrance, but didn't reach it. Instead, she got into an old green Ford pickup truck with tinted windows. At this point, she was holding her phone. However, detectives were aware that Savannah never left Rodarte's car and that he was lying. Unbeknownst to Rodarte, the police had surveillance footage that disproved his claim, showing no Ford pickup truck and Savannah remaining in his car. When asked about subsequent events, Lee stated that he drove home, even detailing the streets he took. Notably, the man had scratches on his arms and neck, which he attributed to a workplace injury when questioned about their origin. When detectives directly asked Rodarte about Savannah's whereabouts, he claimed to have no knowledge. The detectives adjusted their questioning strategy. At first, they listened attentively to his stories, showing interest, but soon they applied gentle pressure. They informed him straightforwardly that evidence contradicted his claim that Savannah had exited his car. After a brief time, Rodarte altered his statement, asserting that he and Savannah had gone to his residence, and then she departed. The detectives remained skeptical and urged him to reveal the entire truth, considering Savannah's family's well-being. Rodarte ultimately admitted to fatally snapping Savannah's neck during a backseat argument in his vehicle. Following their departure from the parking lot, he sent messages to Savannah's father and brother from her phone before discarding it out the window. Rodarte returned the body to his property, intending to dispose of it by fire, but he soon discovered it wasn't as simple as he thought. Instead, he dug a hole and buried the body, only to later exhume it, wrap it in a blanket, and drive approximately 8 miles from the restaurant to a nearby pond, where he discarded the body. Although the autopsy couldn't determine the exact cause of Savannah's death, the examination revealed that her neck wasn't broken, as Rodarte had claimed, and no illegal substances were found in her body. However, forensic experts discovered that the thyroid cartilage in Savannah's throat was fractured, suggesting strangulation, and roughly 75% of her body exhibited fire damage. Despite confessing to the crimes, Rodarte maintained his not guilty plea on charges of second-degree murder, tampering with evidence, and abuse of a dead body. The autopsy revealed that the condition of Savannah's body was too compromised to determine an exact cause of death. Contrary to Rodarte's claims, her neck was not broken, and no illegal substances were found in her system. However, the autopsy did indicate that Savannah was strangled, as her thyroid cartilage was broken and approximately 75% of her body had been burned. Rodarte's confession was revoked at trial, where he claimed he acted in self-defense, alleging that Savannah had initiated the strangulation. This reversal put Savannah's family through additional trauma, forcing them to attend numerous court hearings. Cher Gold, Savannah's mother, has battled recurring cancer during this ordeal, but she remains committed to attending every hearing alongside her family. They have been present at 26 out of 27 hearings, enduring the emotional toll of facing Rodarte, the man responsible for their daughter's death. The family's primary concern now is to bring this painful process to a close and secure justice for Savannah. Lee Rodarte was not the only family member to be charged with murder. In 2016, a year before Lee committed his crime, his sister Amber Camarillo, then 26 and still known by her maiden name Rodarte, shot and killed a woman during a dispute over a car. She received a 20-year prison sentence. Lee Rodarte was offered a plea deal, which required him to plead guilty to second-degree murder in exchange for a 40-year prison sentence. In return, the charges of tampering with physical evidence and abuse of the body would be dropped. After consulting with his attorneys, Rodarte accepted the deal and was sentenced to 40 years in prison on March 11, 2021. Following the verdict, Savannah's family expressed gratitude to everyone for their support. Daniel Gold stated that they loved Savannah and were overwhelmed to discover how many others also cared for her. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Shanae Brooke Edwards. Shanae Brooke Edwards was born in 1989 in Warrnambool, Australia. Shanae grew up with her parents and older brother Tyson. Although her early life and upbringing are not well documented, her loved ones remembered her as an adventure seeker who loved nature, hiking, motorcycling, and animals. She was a kind-hearted, genuine person who formed deep, sincere connections with others, showing generosity, patience, love, and kindness to everyone she met. In 2019, Shanae traveled to Georgia, a country that had long fascinated her with its natural beauty, rich history, and landmarks. Her boyfriend, Maori El Sayed, a Lebanese national, had planned to join her in Georgia, but was unable to do so because the country's borders were closed to unvaccinated individuals at the time. Shanae resided in Tbilisi, the capital of Georgia, where she worked as an English teacher. This allowed her to support herself financially while exploring the country and visiting new destinations. She formed close bonds with like-minded friends who shared her passion for travel. On July 29, 2021, Shanae uploaded a photo to her social media profile, captioning it with the single word, joy. The image was taken during a scenic motorcycle ride, an activity she thoroughly enjoyed. The following day, July 30, 2021, Shanae decided to hike up Matatsminda, a popular tourist attraction situated in the heart of Tbilisi. According to her friends, Shanae would often take leisurely strolls in the wooded area near the mountain, and she had never encountered any issues or threats to her personal safety. On July 30, 2021, Shanae left her residence around 3:30 p.m. and was last spotted near the Church of St. Michael of Tavare, located at the foot of Mount Matatsminda, which serves as a starting point for hikers. Shanae was scheduled to meet friends at a cafe in the capital city, but she failed to appear. When attempts to reach her by phone proved unsuccessful, her friends decided to file a missing persons report with the local authorities. Meanwhile, a friend of Shanae's living in California grew concerned and placed a call to Shanae's phone. When the call was answered, Shanae could be heard screaming, "Please let me go, okay? Just let me go," indicating that she was being attacked and desperately seeking release. The call was abruptly disconnected, and when Shanae's friend tried to call back, there was no answer. There are conflicting accounts of what Shanae's friend in California did next. According to some reports, she posted an urgent message to a Facebook group comprised of expats living in Georgia, asking someone to alert the police to the disturbing phone call. Other sources claim that Shanae's friend directly contacted the Georgian police and relayed the distressing details. It is certain that within hours of Shanae making a frightening phone call, Georgian police became aware of it and began to investigate. Hundreds of police officers and volunteers were deployed to search the area, focusing on the slopes of Mount Matatsminda. The search party utilized search dogs and drones, but Shanae remained missing. By sunset, her phone was still off, and she had not visited any local hospitals. This lack of progress was ominous, as was confirmed the following day. Tragically, on July 31st, after an extensive search, 31-year-old Shanae Brooke Edwards was discovered deceased near a hiking trail. The perpetrator attempted to conceal evidence by hiding the body under tree branches and leaves. A knife, believed to be the crime weapon, was found nearby. Shanae's phone was soon discovered on the mountainside. Further inspection of the crime scene revealed an old, rusty shovel, a fireplace, used needles, and numerous empty bottles. Georgia's Interior Minister revealed to local media that the police have uncovered information not yet disclosed to the public to protect the integrity of the investigation. He assured that the ministry and police officers are doing everything possible to find the perpetrator. The forensic examination of Shanae's body revealed 13 stab wounds, with 5 in the neck area, leading the police to conclude that the perpetrator undoubtedly intended to kill the young woman. Signs of strangulation were also found on her neck. After the authorities officially confirmed Shanae's death, the media reported that the crime was motivated by lust, but the Georgian police denied this, citing the forensic medical examiner's failure to find any signs of a crime against the woman's integrity. Shanae's boyfriend, Moody El-Sayed, has vowed to track down the culprit, no matter how long it takes, and exact revenge. Shanae's death was a devastating blow to her friends, and a particularly traumatic experience for her family, who lived on another continent. They faced the difficult task of transporting her body back home, while the police worked to identify the perpetrator. Although the police are directly responsible for preventing crimes and capturing criminals, in this case, there was an added concern. Georgia's billion-dollar tourism industry could be severely impacted by the fact that a tourist had lost her life in the capital city, a popular tourist destination. The police conducted an extensive investigation, interviewing over 200 people, including Shanae's friends, co-workers, neighbors, and employees and visitors of Matatsminda Park. They examined the roots of the case and reviewed video footage of Shanae's movements on the day she went missing. In an expat Facebook group, a local woman reported hearing a woman screaming on the trails below Matatsminda Park around an hour after Shanae left home. Another woman in the same group claimed to have witnessed a disturbing scene on the mountain the day before Shanae went missing, in which a man was seen aggressively assaulting a woman in the same area where the crime eventually took place. At the same time, the laboratory analyzed the crime weapon and discovered a male DNA sample, but no matches were found in the Georgian police database. Consequently, the samples were sent to the databases of 194 Interpol member states for further checking. Witness interviews revealed that Shanae had no enemies, no history of conflict with anyone, and no association with individuals of questionable character, suggesting she may have been a random victim of a crime with an unclear motive. The police conducted a meticulous investigation, collecting genetic samples from several dozen individuals who could potentially have been involved in the crime, and subjected each to rigorous scrutiny. Following a thorough and multifaceted investigation, authorities were able to narrow down the list of suspects until they found a DNA match. 40 days after Shanae Brooke Edwards' death, the Georgia police released a statement announcing the arrest of a 33-year-old man, Rafael Marsokolov, a Georgian citizen born in 1988. The evidence gathered during the investigation, including testimony, surveillance footage, genetic tests, and other proof, led to his arrest on September 8th. Marsokolov's lawyer stated that his client denies all charges, including robbery and the murder of Shanae Brooke Edwards, and has pleaded not guilty. The lawyer claimed that Marsokolov was not involved in the case and has chosen to exercise his right to remain silent. After Marsokolov's identity was made public, his image was broadcast on television. A woman from the Georgian capital took to Facebook to share a post revealing that her friend had been attacked by two men on Mount Matatsminda a few months prior. And although the police were aware of the perpetrators' identities, the case was closed. She suggested that if the police had done their job properly, the Australian girl might still be alive. Additionally, Marsokolov's own Facebook page revealed that he was an activist for the ruling Georgian Dream Party. On September 10, 2021, the Tbilisi court denied Marsokolov's request to be released on bail while awaiting trial, instead keeping him in custody. The police had obtained strong physical evidence, as well as damning testimony from Marsokolov's brother and wife, who revealed that Marsokolov had confessed to the crime at home. He warned them that if they told anyone about his involvement in Shanae Brooke Edwards' attack, their young child would face the same fate. In October 2021, the Edwards family wrote a heartfelt letter describing Shanae's personality and expressing gratitude to everyone who had supported them. They specifically thanked the government of Georgia for its financial assistance in repatriating Shanae's body and the Georgian people for their ongoing love, attention, and support during this difficult and tragic period. In February 2022, the first hearing on the case took place under Georgian law. Marsokolov faced a possible sentence of 16 to 20 years in prison. At the trial, he chose not to remain silent and pleaded guilty to robbery. However, he denied intentionally taking Shanae's life. The prosecutor disagreed, pointing out that the 13 stab wounds, including 5 to the neck, indicated Marsokolov's intent to kill the victim. After his knife broke, he even strangled Shanae. The defense claimed that Marsokolov has mental health issues and was in an abnormal state when the crime occurred. However, a psychological examination found him to be sane, allowing the court to impose a meaningful punishment based on the severity of the crime. The prosecutor noted that Marsokolov's blood tested positive for powerful drugs at the time of his arrest, but this did not diminish his guilt. Marsokolov admitted his guilt and apologized to Shanae Brooke Edwards' family in his final statement. According to the alleged motive, Marsokolov had intended to steal Shanae's iPhone 12, But his plan was foiled when she threw the phone into a ravine. Only 2 people knew what happened that day, and sadly, one of them is no longer alive to tell the tale. The prosecution requested a postponement of the sentencing, as the victim's brother, Tyson Edwards, wanted to attend the hearing. In a statement, Shanae Brooke Edwards' family urged the Georgian justice system to impose a life imprisonment sentence on Rafael Markelov, citing the tragic and devastating loss of their loved one, who left behind many grieving friends and family members. On March 9, 2022, a trial was held, at which Rafael Markelov was found guilty. Representing the family, Shanae's brother Tyson again requested that the defendant be given a life sentence. Markelov apologized to Tyson Edwards, claiming he was not that kind of person and had simply found himself in this situation. Ultimately, 33-year-old Rafael Markelov was sentenced to 20 years imprisonment, the maximum penalty allowed under Georgian law. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Shannon Mani. Shannon Mani was born on April 6, 1997, to Anshamani and Vijay Mani. When she was a small child, her parents immigrated to the United States from Fiji. The family settled in Waukesha, a small town in southeastern Wisconsin, where Shannon grew up and attended school. She was intelligent, attractive, and very outgoing. Her parents believed Waukesha was the perfect place to raise their children. After completing high school in 2015, Shannon enrolled at the University of Wisconsin at Milwaukee. She was passionate about helping others and aspired to become a social worker. Despite her busy schedule, Shannon worked with her father at an organic food company. It was at work that she met Quentin Neal, 26, who was applying for a similar position. Quentin had a strong desire to make a positive impact on people's lives. Shannon shared a similar passion, dreaming of building a shelter for women and children, while Quentin wanted to create a safe haven for his community. With their similar interests and outlook on life, Shannon and Quentin quickly formed a close bond. As their friendship blossomed into romance, Shannon was overjoyed to have met Quentin, and soon they started living together. Quentin showed genuine care for Shannon, and she ensured their relationship remained happy. They began making plans for their future together. However, their lives took a drastic turn when Shannon vanished without a trace. On April 13, 2018, Shannon failed to pick up her younger brother from school and didn't show up to work. Her phone was switched off, and she hadn't informed anyone about her absence from work. Concerned, her parents went to the police station, unable to locate their daughter. Initially, detectives suspected that Shannon, being young, might have run away or gone off with friends. But her parents disagreed, knowing their daughter well. She wasn't the type to simply switch off her phone and abandon her family, leaving them worried and searching for her. Shannon's mother shared crucial details with investigators, prompting them to take the case more seriously. Shannon was 4 months pregnant when she vanished, which raised concerns since pregnant women rarely disappear without something bad happening to them. Furthermore, some of her belongings, including money and important documents, were still in her room, which was another alarming indication. Shannon's parents told investigators that the father of her child was 27-year-old Quentin Neal. However, when Quentin was contacted by phone, he claimed to have no knowledge of Shannon's whereabouts. According to Quentin, Shannon had been living with her parents, and he hadn't seen her at all that day. The investigators called Quentin again, asking him to come to the police station to answer some questions. Quentin appeared anxious, promising to arrive at the station immediately. When Shannon's parents were still present, Quentin told the investigators that the last time he had seen her was over 24 hours ago, when she left his house to pick up her little brother from school. They had only exchanged a few text messages since then, and had not been in contact again. The investigators asked Quentin if he had any idea where Shannon might be, but he was unable to provide one. According to Quentin, Shannon's life revolved around school and work. and she had always been in touch with her loved ones until that day. However, Quentin recalled that there was another guy who had shown interest in Shannon. Despite knowing she was in a relationship and pregnant, this guy had relentlessly pursued Shannon's affection, even after she asked him to leave her alone. The investigators instantly considered this guy a person of possible concern, as jealousy often leads to reckless behavior. The next day, police began questioning Shannon's friends to gather new information. They distributed details of the search for the young pregnant woman to all police stations in Wisconsin the same day. The first disturbing discovery was made. Shannon's car was found in Milwaukee, about 20 minutes from her home. Forensic experts carefully examined the vehicle inside and out, but found no suspicious signs. There was no evidence of carjacking, struggle, or any other crime. However, Shannon's purse and cell phone were missing from the car. 3 sets of fingerprints were found on the vehicle, including Shannon's and Quentin's. The origin of the third set remained unknown, and the police had to identify the person who left them. That same afternoon, the man mentioned by Quentin was questioned by investigators. Although he claimed to be upset about Shannon's disappearance, he denied Quentin's allegations, stating that he and Shannon were just friends and that he had never pursued a romantic relationship with her. When pressed further, he admitted to confessing his love to Shannon in the past, but she had rejected him, saying they could only be friends. Since then, he had not attempted to win her affection. The guy's fingerprints were found to match those in Shannon's car. However, he explained that he often got rides from Shannon to university, which is why his prints were in her car. He also claimed to have been 100 miles away from Waukesha, attending a baseball game when Shannon went missing. The investigators checked and confirmed his alibi, ruling him out as a suspect. The case got a surprising and crucial break when Shannon's mother, Anshumani, found her daughter's Apple Watch and checked her recent text messages. She took the watch to the police station, handing it over to investigators. Reviewing Shannon's texts, they made a significant discovery. Despite Quentin's claim that he hadn't met Shannon on the day she vanished, the texts showed they had arranged to meet up that day. This meant Quentin had lied to the investigators and Shannon's parents, making him the prime suspect. While examining Shannon's watch messages, investigators uncovered cracks in her relationship with Quentin. They found texts revealing Quentin's abusive behavior towards the pregnant mother. This revelation shocked Shannon, who had been unaware of her lover's true nature. Quentin apologized profusely, begging her not to leave him. Shannon proposed they take a break from each other. The investigators' suspicions grew, fueled by Quentin's troubled past. He had a criminal record, having recently been released from prison after serving time for robbery. He had multiple arrests for assault and other misdemeanors. Shannon's parents had also grown wary of Quentin, noticing their daughter's persistent depression. Moreover, Quentin exhibited emotional instability regarding the unborn baby, further solidifying the investigators' doubts about his character. After Shannon informed her parents about her pregnancy, they arranged a meeting with Quentin, during which he assured them that he would take care of both Shannon and the baby, claiming he had always wanted to have children. However, a few days later, according to Anshumani, Quentin sent Shannon some disturbing texts, contradicting his earlier promise and stating that he didn't want the baby. He even suggested that Shannon should consider having an abortion. The police attempted to track Shannon's cell phone and discovered it was last active in the afternoon of April 13th, near Quentin's residence. Shannon's mother noticed severe bruising on her arms and inquired about the cause. Shannon broke down in tears and revealed that Quentin had physically assaulted her, punching her with his fists while she was in her vehicle. Despite her parents' warnings to end the relationship, Shannon eventually forgave Quentin and resumed dating him. With this concerning information, investigators grew increasingly worried that they might not find Shannon alive, prompting them to obtain a search warrant and rush to Quentin's house. At first, The crime scene did not appear to show any signs of a struggle or disturbance. The area was clean, with no broken furniture or objects. Forensic experts sprayed the first floor with luminol, a chemical that detects blood, but found no evidence. However, when they applied the same test to the basement, the walls and floor glowed, indicating the presence of blood. The numerous marks found at the scene strongly suggested that Shannon was likely no longer alive. Quentin Neal was arrested and taken into custody. Before questioning him, investigators reviewed the contents of his phone and discovered that he had recently searched online for ways to remove evidence of a crime using a lye chemical. This suggested that he was planning to hide traces of his crime. During the interrogation, Quentin initially denied any knowledge of Shannon's whereabouts and claimed to have no connection to her disappearance. However, faced with solid evidence, he began to alter his story. Eventually, he agreed to confess to everything. Quentin claimed to have acted in self-defense when he took Shannon's life. He told investigators that Shannon had visited his house to discuss their future and their child. But the conversation escalated into an argument. According to Quentin, Shannon then entered the kitchen, grabbed a knife and a gun that were being kept for emergencies, and began threatening him. Quentin said he felt compelled to act quickly to protect himself, leading to a physical struggle that ended in Shannon's death. Quentin reiterated to the investigators that he had acted in self-defense, but they were skeptical due to the lack of defensive wounds on his body. Despite their doubts, they continued to listen to his account. Quentin said that, realizing the gravity of his actions, he panicked in the basement where the incident occurred. In an attempt to conceal the evidence, he used a large suitcase to hide the body. Quentin Neal led the police to a storage unit 6 miles from his home, where he had stashed a suitcase containing Shannon's body. When detectives opened the suitcase, they found Shannon's lifeless body, her wrists and ankles bound with duct tape, contradicting Quentin's claim of self-defense. Forensic examination revealed Shannon died from 2 gunshot wounds to the head and had additional knife wounds on her body. Shannon's parents were devastated when detectives informed them of the discovery of their daughter's body on April 18, 2018. Quentin Neal was subsequently indicted for the murders of Shannon Manny and her unborn child. The evidence gathered, including their correspondence from the day of her death, was sufficient for the court to reach a guilty verdict. The dispute had begun when Shannon visited Quentin's home to discuss her pregnancy, but she never left his house alive. The trial of Quentin Neal, accused of killing Shannon, was set to begin in the spring of 2019. However, just days before the trial, anonymous letters were sent to attorneys and court officials, claiming that someone else was responsible for Shannon's death. The letters were later deemed irrelevant after the author, a friend of Quentin's, was identified and found to be trying to confuse the investigation and help Quentin. Quentin faced the death penalty, but denied the charges and claimed he acted in self-defense. 15 months had passed since Shannon's death, and her family waited anxiously for justice, trying to stay positive. Shannon's mother, Anne Shimani, worked hard to keep her daughter's memory alive and not lose hope. Shannon had been passionate about supporting women and children affected by domestic violence, and her family had planned to build a shelter in her honor. However, that dream was never realized, as Shannon herself became a victim of violence. On July 15, 2019, Quentin Neal reached a plea deal with investigators, admitting guilt in the deaths of Shannon and her child. As part of the deal, prosecutors dropped the death penalty. 2 days later, on July 17, 2019, the Milwaukee County Circuit Court sentenced the 28-year-old to 2 concurrent life sentences without parole eligibility, ensuring he will spend the rest of his life in prison. At his sentencing, Neal remained silent, failing to explain his motive for the crime. Shannon's mother, Anne Shimani, expressed relief that justice had been served, noting that the only silver lining was that Neal would no longer harm anyone else. The family plans to keep Shannon's memory alive by opening a shelter in her honor. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Heather Jackson. Heather Jackson, a 23-year-old mother of two, had just found a house on a quiet street near Lake Erie. She was thrilled to have a new place to call home, especially after separating from her husband Wayne and going through a divorce. Despite the challenges they faced as parents, Heather and Wayne were once a happy couple, but their marriage didn't survive the struggles. After the breakup, Heather faced tough times, but she didn't give up. She focused on making her children, 3-year-old Selena and 1-year-old Wayne Jr., happy. On September 8, 2012, Heather's friend Danielle arrived at her house at 2:30 p.m. as they had planned. However, when Danielle knocked on the door, no one answered. She checked all the doors, but they were locked. This was unusual, as Heather would normally let her know if she had to change plans. Danielle's concern grew as she realized Heather and her children were not at home. Danielle tried to reach Heather by calling her mother, Jody, but was unable to get in touch with her that day. Failing that, Danielle contacted all of Heather's friends, but none of them knew her whereabouts. Then Danielle spotted Selena's pacifier on the porch, which made her increasingly anxious. She knew Heather would never leave the house without it. As the hours ticked by with no call from Heather, Jody grew more and more uneasy, her intuition screaming warning signals. She decided to take action and phoned the police, asking them to perform a welfare check. When the officers arrived at the address, they knocked on the door, but received no response. Next, they made their way around the house, peering through the windows, but saw nothing out of the ordinary. With no signs of forced entry or any indication of foul play, they departed. At approximately 7:30 p.m., Thomas Hansen and Dan Reiner, friends of Heather, arrived at her house, having learned that she was missing. They knocked on the front door, but there was no response. Reiner then proceeded to the back porch, forced open the door, and entered the home. Upon entering, they discovered Heather's lifeless body in the bedroom, completely naked, and immediately called the emergency services. Sergeant Eric Gray Bill, a police officer with the Sandusky Force, responded to the call and entered Heather Jackson's home. He found Heather's body awkwardly positioned between the box spring and mattress in her bedroom, with a ligature constricting her neck. Notably, the TV in the house was still operational, but the children were absent. Their room was empty. While inspecting the house, the officers came across a door to a utility closet that they hadn't checked yet. Upon opening it, Sergeant Eric Gray Bill was met with a horrific sight. Stacked boxes, and behind them, the lifeless bodies of Heather's children. The police immediately sealed off the area, treating it as a crime scene. The local officers were left stunned, having never encountered anything so heinous in their careers. The brutal murder of innocent children left them struggling to comprehend how someone could commit such an atrocity. The forensic examination results only added to the devastation felt by Heather's family and friends. According to court documents, Dr. Diana Scala Barnett, the deputy coroner for Lucas County, performed autopsies on the 3 victims. She determined that Heather Jackson's cause of death was ligature strangulation and observed that Heather's rectum was found to be more open than usual after death. Dr. Scala Barnett attributed this to the likely introduction of an object into the rectum around the time of death, which kept it in that state. Dr. Scala Barnett also testified that Wayne Jackson and Selena Jackson died from ligature strangulation. She noted that Selena's underwear had been rolled up, suggesting that the body had been redressed. Furthermore, Selena's rectum showed a similar dilation to her mother's, again indicating that an object was present in her rectum at or around the time of death. Julie Cox, a forensic scientist at the Bureau of Criminal Investigation, reported that the anal swabs taken from Selena Jackson contained seminal fluid. Cox also observed a suspicious stain on Selena Jackson's underwear, which she excised and tested, finding it to contain a sperm cell. The The police were under pressure to swiftly identify and apprehend the culprit behind these heinous crimes. Heather's residence was conveniently located near Firelands Regional Medical Center, and investigators believed that surveillance footage from the building's CCTV cameras might aid in their search for the perpetrator. Upon reviewing the footage, they spotted a car pulling up to Heather's house at 10:57 p.m. However, the camera's distance from the house and the darkness hindered visibility. The car's headlights provided the only clues, revealing that the vehicle had backed into the driveway and remained stationary for some time. 11 minutes later, at 11:08 p.m., the headlights flickered back to life, and the driver departed the scene. Thomas Hansen and Dan Reiner, the two men who found Heather's body, were taken to the police station for questioning. Dan, who had been friends with Heather, was the first to be interrogated. He explained that when he learned Heather was missing, he went to her house to check on her. Dan admitted that he had to push the door hard to gain entry, and as a result, the police asked him to provide DNA samples. He consented, and a swab was taken from his mouth. After that, he was released. Next, the investigators questioned Thomas Hansen. He revealed that he had spoken to Heather over the phone the previous night and was near her house around 11 p.m. According to Thomas, he drove up to Heather's house but didn't enter. They chatted briefly outside, and then he drove home. This information helped the investigators identify the car seen on the CCTV footage as belonging to Thomas. Thomas also claimed that he didn't enter Heather's house that night because she wasn't alone. There was a man, known to him as Josh, inside with her. Hansen's statement echoed Reiner's. He claimed that upon learning of Heather's disappearance, he rushed to her house to investigate. After providing a DNA sample, he was released by the police. The police shifted their focus to Josh, who was at Heather's house shortly before her death. They quickly determined his whereabouts and brought him in for questioning. Josh acknowledged having known Heather for several years. He confessed to being at her house that night, stating that they watched TV while the kids slept in their room. He also mentioned visiting the store to buy breakfast for the children, returning to the house and staying for a while before a friend picked him up around 1 a.m. Notably, Josh admitted to having consensual, intimate contact with Heather. The investigators visited the store where Josh claimed to have purchased breakfast for the kids and reviewed the CCTV footage. The footage confirmed Josh's alibi, showing him entering the store at 11:20 p.m. However, this did not rule out the possibility that he was involved in the crime. As the last known person to have contact with Heather, Josh remained the prime suspect. Josh also provided a DNA sample, which was analyzed along with those of Thomas Hansen and Dan Reiner. The lab results cleared Hansen and Reiner, as their DNA did not match the DNA found on the victims' bodies. Josh's DNA, on the other hand, matched the DNA found on Heather's body, but not on her children's bodies. This indicated that there was another man present in the house that night. Josh had previously confessed to being in a romantic relationship with Heather, which accounted for his DNA being present on her body. However, the police were now tasked with identifying a different individual whose DNA matched the DNA found on the bodies of all three victims. The investigators quickly ruled out Heather's husband Wayne, who was in the process of divorcing her, as a suspect because he lived in a different state. The detectives then focused on Heather's cell phone records, hoping to find some answers. Upon receiving the report, they discovered that Heather had been very active on her phone, right up until the night of her death. Her last phone conversation took place at 3:12 a.m. and lasted 30 seconds. The police now needed to identify the owner of the phone number she had called. 36 hours after Heather's death, the police obtained additional CCTV footage. While analyzing it, the investigators noticed a white car pulling up to her house at around 3 a.m. This coincided with the time Heather stopped using her phone, which might not have been a coincidence. The officers also saw that the white car drove away about an hour later. around the time when Heather, Selena, and Wayne were likely already dead. Although the footage quality was poor and didn't allow the police to see the license plates, they were able to determine that the car was a Cadillac. Once the investigators received information from the phone company about the owner of the phone number Heather had called, they had a lead. The number belonged to 41-year-old Curtis Clinton. It was with him that Heather had her 30-second phone conversation at 3:12 a.m. Curtis Clinton's background check revealed alarming details. Police records showed that Clinton was released from prison in February after serving a 13-year sentence for 2 counts of felonious assault and involuntary manslaughter. He had pleaded guilty to the 1997 murder of 18-year-old Misty Keckler from Fostoria, who was found strangled, naked, and bound in a bathtub. The similarity to Heather's case, combined with the fact that Clinton was released from prison just 6 months prior to Heather and her children's death, raised concerns among investigators. It seemed possible that Clinton had reverted to his previous violent behavior. Furthermore, Clinton owned a white Cadillac, which made him the prime suspect. The police urgently needed to locate him to prevent any further harm. If Clinton was indeed responsible for the murders, he had to be stopped before he could harm anyone else. The police went to Clinton's last known address, but he was not there. A few hours later, a patrol officer found a white Cadillac on a nearby street, but Clinton himself was still missing. A search of the vehicle revealed a receipt from a gas station on the night of the crime. The investigators headed to the gas station to review the CCTV footage. On the recordings, they identified Clinton and his distinctive white Cadillac. Despite already knowing that Heather and her children were deceased, Clinton was seen purchasing water and beer, displaying a calm demeanor. Fearing Clinton might flee, the investigators nonetheless soon received a tip that a patient named Curtis Clinton had been admitted to a local hospital. They swiftly arrived at the hospital and apprehended the suspect they were pursuing. Clinton was arrested and taken into custody, but he vehemently denied any involvement in the tragic deaths of Heather Jackson and her children. During questioning, Clinton revealed that he had been in a romantic relationship with Heather for 5 months, providing her with both financial and emotional support to cope with her numerous personal issues. Clinton claimed to have limited knowledge of Heather's children and stated that he last saw Heather on Tuesday, September 6th. He alleged that on that day, he gave her $328 and they engaged in an intimate encounter. The investigator told Clinton that phone records revealed a 3:12 a.m. call with Heather on September 8th. Clinton corrected himself, saying he had gotten his days wrong, and it was actually Friday night or early Saturday morning when he last saw Heather, not Thursday night. According to Clinton, he didn't stay at her house for long, dropping off the money and engaging in intimate contact before leaving. He explained, "I did my thing and left, but couldn't recall what time he got home." Clinton claimed that someone else must have gone to Heather's house after he left. He said that while he was with Heather, she mentioned that somebody had texted or called her, and she seemed irritated. When informed that he was the last person who had contact with Heather, Clinton denied. However, the examination indicated the opposite. The DNA on the bodies of all 3 victims belonged to Curtis Clinton. Therefore, he was arrested and placed in the county jail. Curtis Clinton was charged with multiple counts during the investigation. It also turned out that 6 days before the death of Heather and her children, Curtis Clinton attacked a 17-year-old girl whose identity was not disclosed by the police. He choked her and forced her to have intimate contact with him. When he let her go, she went to the hospital, and the police at the hospital doctors took DNA samples from her body, which also led to Curtis Clinton. Clinton moved for a change of venue, arguing that extensive media coverage had saturated the county at the time of the offenses, and was likely to resume once the trial started. The trial court denied the motion for a change of venue, stating that while the pre-trial publicity was extensive and adverse to the defendant, the publicity was not sufficiently prejudicial that readers and viewers could not realistically shut it from sight. The court rejected claims of presumed prejudice, stating that the defendant, Curtis Clinton, did not hesitate to take the lives of Heather, Selena, and Wayne, and that his DNA was found inside Selena's body before she died. Clinton knew he was facing the death penalty, but he did not want to die and therefore did everything to achieve a different outcome in the trial. He even remembered what justice was when allowed to speak before being sentenced for the capital crimes. Clinton neither begged for his life nor apologized to the victim's family. Instead, he lashed out at the prosecutor, Kevin Baxter, and vowed he would win on appeal and have his case retried. He stated, "I don't respect the prosecutor, and as I said, I will be back again. I know there's a lot of people who are upset here, but I'm the one who's going through this." This statement triggered a disgusted response from some of the 70 people present at the hearing in November 2013. Curtis Clinton was given the death penalty for the murders of Heather Jackson and her 2 young children. When he learned he would be executed by lethal injection, Clinton became violent towards Heather's brother, who expressed a preference for Clinton to die in prison at the hands of other inmates. Deputies and court staff restrained Clinton, who was handcuffed, and pushed him into a chair, while other officers restrained Heather's brother as they exchanged profanities in a packed Erie County courtroom. Heather's brother was angry, stating that the only thing Clinton should be grateful for is that his life was spared by being placed on death row, and that he wished Clinton had been given a life sentence in prison, allowing his friends to harm him. The judge also sentenced Clinton to life in prison without parole for the murder of 3-year-old Selena, and an additional 10 years in prison for assaulting a 17-year-old girl 6 days before the murder of Heather and her children. In 2018, the Ohio Supreme Court postponed Curtis Clinton's execution, which was scheduled for September 15, 2021, pending the exhaustion of all state post-conviction proceedings, including any appeals. As of now, Curtis Clinton remains on death row, and his sentence has been upheld, but his execution will not take place in the near future. Ohio is currently holding over 100 inmates on death row, but Governor Mike DeWine is doubtful that any of them will be executed in the remaining 3 years of his term. The last execution in the state took place on July 18, 2018, and since then, Ohio has had an effective halt on capital punishment. According to Governor DeWine, the reason for this is that lethal injection is the only approved method of execution in Ohio. But pharmaceutical companies have threatened to retaliate if the state uses their products for this purpose. This would have a significant impact on the state's health department and other agencies. The governor has told the state legislature that the only way to resume executions is to change the law to permit alternative methods of execution. But so far, the legislature has not taken any action, and DeWine does not expect them to do so. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Nathan Pete. Nathan Pete was born on February 12, 1982, in Tamuning, a village on the island of Guam in the Pacific Ocean. Nathan was part of a big, loving family with 3 brothers, Matthew, Anthony, and Eric, and a sister named Carmela. His family was close-knit, with all the children being helpful and supportive of their parents. Nathan was an exemplary child who rarely got into trouble, demonstrating care and kindness at home and being diligent in his studies at school. His sociable nature made him easy to get along with, and he had many friends. Nathan grew up near the ocean and developed a passion for swimming and surfing from a young age. He spent most of his free time at the beach, soaking up the sun and enjoying life. It was during his time at South High School that he met his future wife, Michelle, and Aunt Chuck. They were immediately drawn to each other and began spending all their time together, studying, preparing for classes, and helping with household chores. As they grew closer, their friendship blossomed into romance. Tragedy struck Michelle's family when she was 16, as her mother passed away. Michelle took on a maternal role, caring for her younger sister Melissa and managing the household. Nathan was supportive and helpful throughout this difficult time, assisting with childcare and other responsibilities. After graduating in 2000, Nathan proposed to Michelle, and she happily accepted. Due to financial constraints, they decided to forego a traditional wedding and instead moved in together with the blessing of their parents to start building a life together. Nathan got a job as a receptionist at a local hotel, earning a decent income. Like many young people, he and his partner Michelle were ambitious and had big plans for their future. They wanted their own home and independence. When their son Dion was born, Nathan's income was no longer enough to cover their expenses. To provide a better life for his family, Nathan decided to join the Air Force. After completing his training, Nathan was assigned to Elmendorf Air Base in Anchorage, Alaska. Although Michelle was left to care for their baby alone, the family's financial situation improved. Eventually, they were able to build their own home, where their second child, a daughter named Niara, was born. Nathan's military career took off, and he was able to provide for his family's needs. 6 years after getting engaged, Nathan and Michelle finally had a big wedding, achieving their long-held dreams. In 2006, Nathan was transferred to the Davis-Monthan military base in Arizona, where he was promoted to lead a team responsible for loading weapons onto a 10 Thunderbolt attack aircraft. He also received training in logistics and material management. Nathan was dedicated to his job and performed it with the best intentions, truly serving his country. A coworker described Nathan as a hard worker. In 2007, Nathan and his family relocated to Nellis Air Base near Las Vegas, Nevada. There, he took on a new role as a junior officer in charge of the supply section for combat aircraft maintenance. As Nathan's career grew, so did his family. He and his wife, Michelle, had 2 more sons, Drawn and David. Because Michelle fell in love with Las Vegas, and Nathan wanted to make her happy, so he chose a house in Las Vegas that's spacious and bright, house perfect for their large family. Initially, Michelle was overjoyed with the surprise, but as time passed, their expenses began to exceed Nathan's earnings, causing their financial happiness to dwindle. Financial struggles strained Nathan and Michelle's relationship. To improve their situation, Nathan enlisted in the military, despite the U.S. being at war with Iraq. His 6-month deployment led to significant financial improvements, bringing him a sense of satisfaction. After a brief rest, Pete returned to Iraq, leaving Michelle to care for their 4 children. The weight of this responsibility, combined with Nathan's prolonged absences, took a toll on Michelle's mental health. She became anxious about being alone and struggled to cope with a reduced standard of living. To alleviate her worries, Michelle started working at a corporate credit card telemarketing firm and attended an aesthetics school to develop her skills. However, when Nathan left for Iraq again, Michelle felt isolated and disenchanted. Her relationship with Nathan was strained, and she turned to a colleague, Michael Rudolph Rodriguez, a charismatic but untrustworthy individual with a questionable past. By the end of 2009, Nathan returned home, and it seemed that the time apart had affected his family relationships. Michelle had been leading a double life, and her intentions were not entirely pure. She had developed feelings for someone else, but she didn't want to lose her husband. To keep him, she tried to please him in every way, changing her appearance and behavior. Nathan was fascinated by the changes in Michelle, but he didn't suspect that something was amiss. He was happy to be back with his family and decided to stay for a while. The children had struggled in school without their father, and Nathan was determined to make up for lost time. To earn extra money, Nathan started working night shifts in Las Vegas and also began teaching baseball to young children privately. He developed a simplified training program that was well received. However, as the family's standard of living declined, Michelle's attitude towards Nathan changed. By Thanksgiving 2010, the tension was palpable. When Nathan's brother Eric and his wife Veronica visited, they were shocked by the change in they, sensing the strain between Nathan and Michelle. It appeared that Michelle and Nathan's feelings for each other had diminished significantly. They was having trouble concealing their personal and financial struggles from others. In fact, their pantry and refrigerator were nearly bare. A conversation between Michelle and Michael occurred on December 1, 2010, in a sequence of events that seemed unusual. At 11:12 p.m., Michael sent Michelle a text message, inquiring about her well-being and mentioning that they were nearing completion of the Van Dyke contract, which was due the following day. 2 minutes later, Michael sent a follow-up message, offering Michelle a chance to take a couple of days off to rest if she was still not feeling well. He emphasized that her contributions were highly valued. Michelle responded to Michael's messages at 11:19 p.m. She mentioned that her husband had just awakened her, informing her that he would be late that day, although she was unsure about the specifics. A few months before the tragedy, Michelle was not hesitant to leave her husband Nathan. She believed that a divorce would only lead to financial struggles and emotional distress. She also doubted that Nathan would forgive her and provide sufficient alimony to support a normal life. However, Michelle was aware of Nathan's military insurance policy, which would pay out approximately $650,000 in the event of his death. This thing weighed heavily on her mind. Michelle shared her troubled thoughts with Michael, who was intrigued. They hatched a sinister plan to kill Nathan, with Michael invited Corey, a friend with a history of theft and fraud, for a $20,000 reward. Corey's girlfriend Jessica and her friend Shannon joined in, with Shannon promised a 5% profit. The original plan was to kill Nathan in a parking lot. Jessica bought supplies, including gloves and cologne. Shannon provided an alibi for Michael. However, Michelle's early return home on December 1, 2010, changed the plan. She usually arrived home around 10:40 p.m., but came home early and spent the evening with Nathan, unaware of the tragic events that would soon unfold. Nathan was running late for work, so he rushed downstairs just as Michelle was communicating with Michael. To avoid arousing suspicion, Michelle used coded messages. Unbeknownst to Nathan, Michael was parked in a black Cadillac SRX in front of the house, wearing latex gloves to prevent leaving any evidence. Michael realized that Nathan's military training made him a formidable opponent, so he decided to take him by surprise. Approaching Nathan from behind, Michael shot him 5 times in the back. He quickly escaped in his car and drove away. After the crime, Michael and Shannon went to a hotel to create an alibi. Meanwhile, Jessica thoroughly cleaned their apartment to remove any incriminating evidence. The perpetrators then disposed of their clothes by burning them in a fireplace. Later, police officers arrived at the scene and were shocked by what they found. In a neighborhood considered one of the safest, Detective Todd Williams began investigating the crime scene. He found the garage door unlocked, with a strong smell of iron inside. Blood was splattered on the walls, car, and floor. Nathan's uniform, keys, and wallet were still intact, with no valuables missing. Given the lack of missing valuables, the police ruled out robbery as a motive for the murder. Detective Laurie Anderson spoke with Michelle, the victim's wife, after examining the scene. Michelle mentioned the family's financial struggles, sparking ideas for the police. They wondered if Nathan was hiding something, such as a gambling addiction or affair, which could have motivated the attack. The evidence suggested Nathan was deliberately targeted. The police examined the victim's cell phone and found only pictures of his wife and children, which led them to believe that Pete was a decent man. The investigation continued, and the next step was to canvass the neighborhood. as some neighbors reported seeing a car parked near the pet house, driven by a man wearing a brown sweatshirt, which quickly drove away after shots were fired. This gave detectives their first lead. Nathan's family was shocked to learn of his death and immediately flew to Guam to get answers. His mother, Carmelita Pett, was devastated and cried the whole way. When they arrived at the victim's home, Michelle, Nathan's wife, threw herself into her mother-in-law's arms and then lost consciousness. However, Nathan's mother sensed that her daughter-in-law's reaction seemed unnatural and possibly fake. The investigators decided to question Michelle again and asked her about the car witnesses had seen. Unexpectedly, she mentioned that her colleague, Michael Rodriguez, had a similar car. It's unclear why Michelle revealed this information, but it helped the police piece together the puzzle. It was later determined that Michelle had inadvertently revealed the truth, or perhaps the perpetrator's plan was flawed from the start. Detectives investigated Michael's identity and discovered he had a criminal record, which raised suspicions. They brought him in for questioning, and he responded calmly. According to Michael, on the day of Nathan's murder, he went shopping at a supermarket around 9 p.m. and met a woman named Shannon. They had a long conversation and decided to continue their acquaintance in a hotel room. Michael claimed they arrived at the hotel around 11 p.m. To verify Michael's alibi, the officers contacted Shannon, who confirmed their romantic encounter. However, the detective had doubts, so they decided to examine Michelle's phone records. Specialists recovered the correspondence between Michelle and Michael, which showed they had been communicating for a year. Their conversation on the day of Nathan's murder seemed suspicious, as they discussed a contract with someone named Van DJK in a cryptic manner, suggesting they might have been planning the crime. Michael was released for lack of evidence, but detectives re-questioned Michelle after analyzing her phone. She became agitated and hid something. As investigators pushed for more information, Michelle confessed to planning Nathan's murder with Michael, her lover, for insurance payouts. However, messages revealed her guilt, including a smile emoticon after Nathan's death. Meanwhile, Shannon told police that Michael's account of the attack was truthful. She admitted that she originally cooperated with him, but later surrendered to the police when she felt exploited and feared for her own safety. Hotel security footage supports her claim, revealing that Michael and Shannon arrived at the hotel at 11:40 p.m., which disputes Michael's initial statement that they arrived at 11 p.m. Detectives discovered Corey's involvement in the case after a key witness came forward. Although Corey had consistently denied any involvement, Jessica eventually revealed her role in the sinister plan. Michael Rodriguez, Corey Hawkins, Jessica Austin, and Michelle were arrested on December 8, 2010, and held without bail. Due to concerns about her mental health, Michelle was placed under surveillance to prevent a potential suicide attempt. In Clark County District Court on January 4, 2011, the 4 defendants were formally charged with conspiracy to commit murder and robbery with a firearm, as well as murder with a firearm. Michael and Corey faced additional charges of firearm possession. On September 21, 2015, Michael Rudolph Rodriguez was the first to go on trial for the murder of Nathan. To avoid the death penalty, he pleaded guilty. 1 week later, on September 29, 2015, Michael was sentenced to life in prison without possibility of parole. His appeal was later denied. At the time of sentencing, Michael showed no emotion and did not express any regret for his crime. Michelle Pete went on trial in Las Vegas a month later, claiming a change of heart about killing her husband. She tearfully apologized to the victim's parents in court, saying she loved her husband and children and made a terrible mistake, before she fainting. The prosecutor argued that Michelle did not attempt to thwart the conspiracy, despite her claims to the contrary. The evidence presented in court supported this assertion. It was difficult for many to understand how a mother of 4 could become involved in such a heinous crime. The judge ultimately sided with the prosecution, concluding that Michelle was more involved in the crime than she had admitted. Michelle eventually pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit murder and first-degree murder with a firearm, which allowed her to avoid the death penalty. The Pete family also requested that the court not impose the death penalty on Michelle. Corey Alexis Hawkins also accepted a plea bargain to avoid the death penalty. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Jessica Austin also took a plea deal with prosecutors and was charged with conspiracy to commit murder. At her final sentencing in March 2016, Michelle again cited her unstable emotional state as a factor in her decision to commit the crime. The Pete family children will likely suffer lifelong trauma, making it hard to form strong bonds. The pain will haunt them, but justice has been served with the 4 responsible individuals facing consequences. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Rob Andrew. Brenda Evers, the future wife of Rob Andrew, was born on December 16, 1963, in Enid, Oklahoma. She grew up in a devout Christian family that prioritized faith and family values. Her childhood was filled with regular family meals, group prayers, and church attendance. As a result, Brenda developed into a quiet and peaceful individual who excelled academically and spent much of her free time volunteering at church. As a high school student, Brenda was a cheerleader for the soccer team and enjoyed dancing, but she avoided parties and social gatherings. She aspired to be like her mother, who was a model of piety and modesty. Brenda's goal was to become a housewife after marriage, devoting herself to her husband and children. At the age of 17, Brenda met her first love, Rob Andrew, who was the older brother of her friend. Despite their different denominational backgrounds, Rob was a Baptist and Brenda a Lutheran. They shared conservative views on life, a strong faith, and a dream of building a large and close-knit family. The friendly relationship between them blossomed into something more. Although they were separated by 125 miles when she started college in Winfield, Kansas, they maintained regular communication. To be closer to her partner, Brenda transferred to a university in Stillwater, Ohio, a year later. They eventually got married in the summer of 1984. As Rob's career took off, he received a job offer in Houston, Texas. Although he had initially hesitated, Brenda convinced him to take the opportunity. While Rob thrived as an advertising manager, Brenda completed her degree and secured a job in banking. She fell in love with the city's vibrant nightlife, impressive skyscrapers, and fast-paced lifestyle. Her time in Texas brought about a transformation in Brenda, as she overcame her initial shyness and developed a more outgoing personality. She started taking care of her appearance, dressing fashionably, wearing makeup, and building a large social network. Rob was unhappy with the changes he saw in his wife. He believed a woman of faith should be more subdued. Additionally, Rob was homesick and eager to return to his old life. When he was offered his old job back at an advertising agency in Oklahoma City, he jumped at the opportunity. However, Brenda was not supportive of his decision. They argued about it, but eventually found a compromise. They agreed that Rob would settle in the new location, find a suitable house, and if everything worked out, Brenda would join him. They lived apart for a few months, but eventually reunited. In the early 1990s, they moved into a luxurious house in the upscale neighborhood of Westbrook. Brenda gave birth to a daughter 9 months later. She even quit her job to become a full-time homemaker and devote herself to raising their child. 4 years later, they welcomed the son Parker. It seemed like they had the perfect life, love, children, a beautiful home, and financial security. On November 20th, 2001, Rob had arranged to pick up the children from his ex-wife to spend the holiday with them. At the time, they were divorced. In the evening, Brenda greeted him at the door and asked him to go to the garage to help her with some faulty equipment. Rob was bending down when he heard footsteps behind him. He turned around, and a gunshot rang out. Around 6 p.m., emergency services received a call from Brenda Andrew. She reported that she was injured and her husband was dead. An ambulance rushed to the scene, where paramedics found a horrific scene in the garage. A man lay in a pool of blood, dead from a gunshot wound. His wife, Brenda, was shot in the arm but alive. Brenda's clothes were stained with blood, and she appeared detached from the situation. The paramedics believed she was in shock. She told them that she tried to give Rob first aid, but she thought he was dead. Brenda's hand was bandaged, and she was taken to the hospital. As the ambulance left, police began investigating the scene. They found a .22 caliber bullet lodged in the wall and a shotgun shell casing, indicating that multiple weapons were used. The officers also noticed that the victim still had his wallet on him, ruling out robbery as a motive. At the clinic, Brenda explained that she and Andrew were together when two masked and armed men suddenly entered the garage. Although she couldn't make out what they were shouting, one of the men shot Andrew twice, and the other wounded her as she tried to escape. The attackers then quickly fled the scene. Brenda claimed that Andrew was a kind and helpful person who didn't have any enemies. She acknowledged feeling frightened by the attack, especially since there were children in the house at the time. However, her account raised suspicions, and the police noticed several inconsistencies in her story. Notably, she mentioned that the children were present during the attack, but it was clear that they had not been prepared for a trip, contradicting her earlier statement. Interviews with neighbors yielded no useful information. To gain insight into Brenda and Rob's personal life, detectives questioned their friends and acquaintances, revealing marital problems since their second child's birth. Friends and Pastor Andrew reported that Rob confided in them about Brenda's abusive behavior and her hatred for their marriage. Ronnie Street, a close friend of the Roberts family, observed that Brenda's behavior had become unusual. She was open about her feelings, even with strangers, and her husband Rob seemed to love her unconditionally, forgiving her for her antics. Friends of the family noted that Brenda had undergone a significant change from being a typical housewife to someone with loose morals. There was substantial evidence to support these claims. Brenda seemed to be having a midlife crisis, dressing more provocatively and becoming secretive towards her husband. Rob soon discovered she was having an affair, which began in October 1997 with Rick Nunley, a co-worker from the Oklahoma bank. Brenda was married, but secretly dated someone for a year and then maintained occasional phone contact. She then started an affair with James Higgins, a local store owner, who was drawn to her bold style and flirting. They met secretly in a hotel room once or twice a week for about 5 years. Meanwhile, Brenda's husband, Rob, remained unaware of her infidelity. However, he couldn't help but notice that their marriage was falling apart. His wife had become distant, rarely speaking to him or spending time with him. Rob tried his best to hold the family together, hoping that things would eventually improve. In 2001, Brenda ended her affair with Higgins, but not because she wanted to salvage her marriage. Instead, she was sinking deeper into a life of immorality and vice. Around this time, a new Baptist church had opened in Oklahoma City, largely thanks to the efforts of Brenda's husband, Rob. He became a deacon at the church, and Brenda taught Sunday school. From the outside, it seemed like they were a perfect, moral family. Brenda, a devoted wife, taught her children about faith and community. She met James Pavitt, a part-time teacher and friend of Rob, who was drawn to her charm. As their relationship blossomed in 2001, they kept it secret but eventually became open about their feelings. Rob's suspicions of Brenda's infidelity led to a heated argument and separation. James also ended his marriage. While Rob hoped to reconcile, Brenda filed for divorce. A mysterious phone call and car malfunction followed, leading Rob to suspect James and Brenda were behind the attempt on his life. He reported his concerns to the police, raising questions about what drove him to make such a claim. Rob Andrew and his wife Brenda's divorce was already settled, including a custody agreement for their children. However, a large insurance policy taken out by James Pavitt could still financially benefit Brenda upon Rob's death. In fact, just months prior, James had sold Rob an $800,000 life insurance policy, listing Brenda as the sole beneficiary. This raised suspicions about Brenda's involvement in the recent violent attack on Rob. Detectives discovered that Brenda's new lover, James Pavitt, was involved in the insurance scheme and that Rob had tried to remove Brenda from the policy 2 weeks before the incident, but James refused, citing that only Brenda could make changes as the beneficiary. Rob didn't take his former friend's word for it, so he decided to investigate further by speaking with management. What he found out was shocking. Brenda and James had tried to forge the insurance policy by transferring ownership to Brenda, falsifying Rob's signature and backdating the document. However, Rob was assured by Pavitt's superiors that he still owned the policy and that only the policy holder could make changes to the contract. When James found out about this, he was furious, as this discovery was the reason for his termination. In a separate development, an inspection at the neighbor's house, the Gigstad's family, yielded an unexpected result. A fired shell casing from the shotgun in question was found on the bedroom floor, and several .22 caliber bullets were found in the attic. At the time of the crime, the Gigstad couple was not home, and there were no signs of forced entry. Mrs. Gigstad revealed that she had given a spare key of their home to Brenda Andrew. Additional, James's daughter provided another crucial piece of evidence. On the day of the crime, she had lent her car to her father, who promised to have it repaired. However, when James returned the vehicle, Joanna noticed that the repairs had not been made. Moreover, she found a .22 caliber bullet in the car, which she thought was suspicious. When she told her father about the bullet, he instructed her to get rid of it. Further investigation revealed that James had purchased a handgun just a week before the attack. This new information led detectives to plan a questioning of James and Brenda. The funeral of Rob Andrews was held on November 23rd, but it was notable for the absence of Brenda, her children, and James Pavitt. Their failure to attend the ceremony raised many questions among family and friends, and also sparked concern among the police. It soon became apparent that the missing individuals had fled, leaving behind a trail of suspicion and unanswered questions. The police had a breakthrough in the case. They had identified the suspects and received the autopsy results. However, Brenda's account of the attack contradicted the forensic evidence. The police discovered that 2 different guns were used in the attack, and the injuries sustained by Rob and Brenda differed from the description provided by Brenda. The investigation revealed that the first shot was fired from a shotgun at a distance, but the second shot came from a .22 caliber pistol at close range. The same pistol was used to shoot Brenda's arm. Analysis of the bloodstains on the fabric showed that the shooter was standing near the victim when the second shot was fired. The angle of the blood matched the shooter's position, indicating that Brenda was the one who fired the second shot at Rob. Brenda and James were officially named suspects and a warrant was issued for their arrest. However, they had a substantial lead and had already gone into hiding. The police notified border officials to be on the lookout for but they had vanished. It eventually became clear that James and Brenda had fled to another country, with Mexico being the suspected destination. To capture the fugitives, the authorities froze their bank accounts, assuming that without access to their funds, they would eventually surface. This strategy proved effective, and 3 months later, James reached out to his daughter, Joanna, requesting that she send him money. Unbeknownst to James, Joanna was secretly working with the investigators. Joanna had long suspected her father's involvement in the crime, as he had been secretive and evasive with her. She recalled a previous incident where he had asked her boyfriend to pose as a doctor and call Rob, informing him that his wife was ill. It led them to discover that James and Brenda were secretly staying in Cancun, Mexico. In February 2002, James Pavitt and Brenda Andrew were arrested at the border and turned over to U.S. authorities. They were charged with first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit a felony. The children were placed in the care of their paternal grandparents. During the investigation, neither James nor Brenda cooperated or pleaded guilty. James was the first to stand trial. The prosecution presented a strong case, highlighting James' background as an Army sniper and his experience with firearms. The court also heard about James' affair with Brenda and his attempts to prevent Rob Andrew from removing Brenda as a beneficiary. The jury considered the testimony of James' daughter and physical evidence found at the scene. James was found guilty and sentenced to death. Brenda's trial followed, but it was more dramatic and revealing than James'. The prosecution focused on Brenda's personality and history of infidelity, calling her former lovers to testify. They portrayed her as someone lacking in faith and integrity. When the prosecutor questioned Brenda about her husband's murder, she claimed to be innocent and asked to be set free, citing her faith. However, the prosecutor presented a different image of Brenda, portraying her as a woman who didn't love her husband, cheated on him, and killed him for selfish reasons. To support his argument, the prosecutor showed the contents of a suitcase Brenda had taken to Mexico, which included lingerie and a book about seduction techniques. He questioned whether a grieving widow would flee her husband's funeral. In contrast, the defense team attempted to depict Brenda as a victim of the events that transpired. The defense attorney pointed out that Brenda was also injured during the attack, but forensic experts concluded that she had shot herself in the arm. The defense then produced a letter allegedly written by James, confessing to the crimes. However, handwriting analysis revealed that the document was actually forged by Brenda Andrew herself. After 6 hours of deliberation, the jury delivered a guilty verdict, and Brenda Andrew was sentenced to death. Despite Brenda's repeated appeals, her conviction has been upheld. The crimes committed by Brenda and James are extremely disturbing. What makes their case even more troubling is that they presented themselves as devout and moral individuals who taught children right from wrong. This hypocrisy raises serious concerns, as people who preach one thing but do not practice it in their own lives can be unpredictable and devoid of empathy. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Rachel Anderson. Rachel Anderson was born on January 28, 1994, in Warren, Ohio, to parents William, Bill, Rachel and Patricia, Trish, Rachel. She grew up with a younger brother, John, with whom she shared a close family bond. Rachel graduated from Warren Harding High School in 2012, where she excelled academically as a member of the National Honor Society. She was also an active athlete, participating in soccer and volleyball. Despite the unconventional nature of her career aspirations, Rachel had always dreamed of becoming a funeral director since childhood. This passion led her to pursue a degree in mortuary science at Youngstown State University. Her hard work and dedication earned her recognition as one of the top students in her field and secured a scholarship. Following her undergraduate studies, Rachel enrolled in the Cincinnati College of Mortuary Science, graduating in 2016 with a Bachelor of Science in Mortuary Science. She became a member of the Ohio Funeral Directors Association and moved to Columbus, where she completed an internship at Shaw Davis Funeral Home. Rachel approached her work with great respect and saw it as her duty to support and care for families during difficult times. Rachel's internship was nearing its end, and she had high hopes of becoming a permanent employee at the Bureau. On January 26, Rachel Anderson celebrated her 24th birthday. The next day, her brother John visited her from Warren. Before he left to return home on January 28, Rachel gave him the key to her apartment. However, John accidentally took the key with him when he left. Later that day, Rachel realized she had misplaced her key and contacted John Kennedy, who had a spare, to arrange a pickup. After speaking with her mother around 6:30 p.m., Rachel retrieved her key from Kennedy. Since her apartment door could only be locked from the outside with a key, she had to leave it unlocked. Rachel stopped for dinner at her favorite restaurant and arrived home around 7:30 p.m. As she entered her apartment, she was confronted by a man who was waiting for her. He abducted her, taking her to the top floor of the building, where he restrained her using various objects. The man bound Rachel's feet and ankles with a hair dryer cord, tied her hands with a belt and blinds cords, and used a curling iron cord to restrain her wrists. He also gagged her to silence her. A man then forced Rachel to reveal her PIN numbers and subjected her to torture, abuse, and physical harm. Ultimately, he strangled her with a cord from an electric blanket, causing blunt force trauma and the stab wound to her head. After the attack, the man hid Rachel's body in a closet, leaving her partially naked with the electric blanket cord still tied around her neck. He then stole her car and used her bank cards to make purchases at several stores in Columbus. Forensic evidence revealed that bruising and red marks on Rachel's ankles and wrists suggested she was alive when the perpetrator restrained her. A DNA sample was discovered on the rope used to tie her up and on Rachel's body. The coroner's autopsy report concluded that Rachel's death was caused by a stab wound to the head and neck, contradicting the initial theory of strangulation. After interviewing Rachel's co-workers and her ex-boyfriend, who had an alibi, detectives explored alternative explanations for the attack. They returned to Rachel's apartment to search for clues, hoping to identify the perpetrator. During this search, they found Rachel's purse, which was missing her wallet, on the living room floor. 2 weeks later, Rachel's mother discovered the 9-inch steak knife used in the stabbing in a box in the apartment. Detectives initially thought the crime was a robbery, but the brutality and torture inflicted on Rachel suggested that the perpetrator was not just a thief, but a skilled and sadistic individual who took pleasure in exerting power over his victim. The investigators considered various motives but had no suspects and kept the investigation details secret to avoid compromising the case. Later, DNA samples were found on Rachel's body and at the crime scene, but unfortunately, they did not match anyone in the Special Services database. Fortunately, a surveillance video showed 2 people using Rachel's car to drive around the city after her death, and cash was withdrawn from her debit and credit cards. An investigation revealed a crucial lead when a phone number linked to the night of January 28, 2018, at Rachel's apartment was identified. Location data analysis led authorities to the suspect. Anthony Perrin, a 54-year-old convicted offender, was arrested. He had spent 33 years in prison for violent crimes, including rape, robbery, kidnapping, and attempted murder. Anthony Perrin had a turbulent past, beginning with his upbringing by grandparents, then living with his mother. Mental health diagnoses, including conduct disorder and antisocial personality disorder, indicated serious social problems. He entered a youth commission facility at age 14, then transitioned into foster care. At 15, Anthony faced his first charge in 1980 for abusing a young foster brother he babysat. A year later, he threatened his girlfriend's mother with a knife and attempted to drown her before fleeing. In 1982, Anthony Perrin was convicted of crimes in Franklin at 17 and served 24 years. After release in 2006, he moved to Georgia, was charged with forgery in 2007, and spent 9 more years in prison. Released in 2017, he returned to Ohio, required to check in with the sheriff's department every 90 days. On August 21, 2017, Anthony was caught with a woman in his car. 6 days later, he was stopped for driving without a license and found with a knife and shotgun, but wasn't arrested. Later, CCTV footage showed Rachel's car outside a store, with a man getting out of the passenger side. The driver wasn't visible, but police identified the man as Anthony Slits. He was questioned and revealed he was approached by a man who offered him money to cash in his ex-girlfriend's cards. Slits confirmed Anthony's identity and outlined their route on January 28, 2018, when they tried to cash out Rachel's stolen cards. Anthony Perrin remained at large until his capture on February 9, 2018, when he was taken into custody following a multi-day stakeout of his sister's home. Anthony was charged with multiple counts of serious crimes, including burglary, robbery, kidnapping, rape, and murder. Nearly 2 years later, his trial began on February 4, 2020, and 4 witnesses testified on the first day, including Rachel's co-worker Jonathan Kennedy, who was the person who found Rachel. The trial continued with testimony from Jonathan and the manager of the apartment complex where the crime occurred. Officer Frank Ghani, who was parked outside the apartment when the body was discovered, also testified and shared the surveillance footage with the jury. On the same day, Anthony expressed dissatisfaction with his attorneys to the judge and requested new representation. However, it became apparent that Anthony was intentionally delaying the proceedings. The prosecution presented expert witnesses on February 10, including a latent print expert, who explained how technology was used to track the use of Rachel Anderson's debit card and its connection to the crime scene. The defendant's sister also testified, revealing that her brother had given her the debit card, claiming it belonged to his girlfriend. However, after watching news reports, she discovered that the card actually belonged to Rachel. The final day of testimony was February 11th. The medical examiner testified that the defendant's DNA was found at the crime scene. Additionally, a forensic pathologist and a deputy coroner from the Franklin County office provided details about the extent of Rachel Anderson's injuries. During the final hearing on February 12, Assistant Prosecutor Amy Van Killen presented the state's closing argument, outlining the events of the crime and asserting that Anthony had murdered Rachel Anderson in cold blood. In contrast, defense attorney Larry Thomas acknowledged that Anthony had used Rachel's cards, but argued that he was not responsible for the crime. The defense attorney argued that the prosecution's case lacked concrete evidence, as the DNA and cell phone data did not definitively link Anthony Perrin to the crime. However, after deliberating for approximately 6 hours over 2 days, the jury of 4 men and 8 women found him guilty on all counts. The prosecution pursued the death penalty due to the severity of the crime, which involved the murder of Rachel Anderson during an aggravated burglary. Additionally, Anthony's prior conviction for a similar attempted murder of a woman weighed against him. Prosecutor Bryan stated that some individuals consistently disregard the law, and Anthony Perrin is a prime example. The sentencing phase of the trial began on February 18th. In an attempt to mitigate the sentence, the defense presented evidence of Anthony's troubled childhood, but the prosecution counter-argued that the aggravating circumstances of the case outweighed any mitigating factors. During the trial, it was established that Anthony Perrin was fully aware of his actions when he attacked Rachel. Despite this, several people testified on his behalf, including his mother, sister, a psychologist, and a former teacher. Anthony also addressed the jury, sharing a 13-minute unscripted statement about his troubled past, including an abusive childhood and difficulties after being released from prison. In his statement, Anthony described feeling helpless and claimed that the system had failed him. He blamed the justice system for his current situation but did not directly address the crime or apologize for it. After deliberating for 3.5 hours, the jury was unable to agree on the death penalty and instead recommended life in prison without parole. The sentencing took place on March 16, 2020. Rachel's mother was visibly emotional in court as the verdict was announced. Rachel's father also spoke, expressing his surprise at how Anthony, a repeat offender with a history of violence, was able to make demands and become hysterical during the investigation. The case of Rachel Anderson's murder drew to a close as Anthony Perrin's sentence was handed down. However, what stood out was not the severity of the sentence, but rather the disturbing behavior of one individual, Anthony Perrin himself. As an adult, he shifted the blame away from himself and onto the system, denying any personal responsibility for his heinous actions. Despite his efforts to deflect blame, Anthony received 2 consecutive life sentences without parole, one for aggravated murder and another for violent crimes. In addition, he was given 63 more years for other crimes including burglary, kidnapping, robbery, and various violent offenses. This marked a total sentence of multiple consecutive life terms plus 63 years. Hello friends. Welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Donald Alban Blom. Donald Blom was born on February 5, 1949, in Minnesota. He had a difficult childhood, experiencing physical abuse from his father from a young age until his teenage years. As a result, Blom developed behavioral problems and began drinking heavily at an early age. These issues continued into his teenage years, and Blom was eventually sent to a reform school in 10th grade, where he frequently skipped classes. The trauma of his violent relationship with his father likely contributed to his behavioral and alcohol problems, which became more pronounced during puberty. Fast forward to May 26, 1999. Caitlin Poirier was working the night shift alone at a convenience store. After midnight, a customer called the police to report that the clerk was missing. When officers arrived, they found the store empty. Reviewing the surveillance footage, they saw a large man grabbing Caitlin by the neck and leading her out of the store around 11:40 p.m. A man wearing jeans, a backwards baseball cap, and a New York Yankees jersey with the number 23 was seen acting suspiciously near a store. Catherine Hannock, an employee at the nearby Subway restaurant, reported seeing the man behaving strangely before Caitlin's store closed. As she drove home, she coincidentally encountered the same man, who was driving a black Ford F-150 pickup truck with an extended cab and white markings on the side. Hannock followed the truck from a distance and saw it circle the maintenance area several times before entering Moose Lake and stopping in a cafe parking lot. She also noted that Caitlin's car was still in the store's parking lot when she left work. Based on Hannock's description and partially recovered surveillance footage, police created a rough sketch of the suspected kidnapper. The suspect had long blonde hair and looked approximately 25 years old. Based on descriptions from 4 witnesses, a composite sketch was created and shared with the public through local TV and newspapers, seeking information about the person. As the search for evidence continued, hundreds of people from throughout the state gathered to help comb the wooded area around the station, hoping to find the missing Katie Poirier. Police used service dogs and helicopters to search for Katie, but their efforts yielded nothing. Her photo was widely circulated in newspapers and on billboards, making her case a high-profile missing persons investigation. Authorities checked the local sex offender facility, which was near the store where Katie disappeared, and confirmed that all inmates were present and accounted for. This information helped rule out the possibility of a kidnapping by a fugitive offender. Police then focused on searching for a vehicle with a specific license plate number, which led them to Donald Blom. However, the truck at his residence was white, not matching the description of the vehicle they were looking for. The official search for Katie ended on June 6, 1999, without any success. Despite the official search ending, many volunteers continue to look for Katie, hoping that someone might have seen something that could lead to her safe return. Investigators were also waiting for the perpetrator to make another mistake, which could help them crack the case. Maps marked searched areas, but Katie remained missing. 2 weeks later, a man called the hotline, reporting coworker Donald Hutchinson, who matched the composite sketch and had recently stopped driving his black pickup truck, was absent the day after the abduction and got a haircut. An investigation into Katie's disappearance revealed a surprising discovery about Donald Hutchinson. He was actually an alias for Donald Blom, a man who had a hidden black pickup truck in his garage and owned property just 12 miles from the store in Moose Lake where Katie worked. As investigators dug deeper, they uncovered Blom's dark past, which included convictions for sex crimes involving the kidnapping of petite young girls, much like Katie. With this new information, detectives quickly obtained a search warrant for Blom's property. Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension agents tracked down Blom to a campground 140 miles outside of Richfield and brought him in for questioning. They also discovered that Blom had purchased the Moose Lake property 2 years prior, and neighbors confirmed he had been a frequent visitor until Katie's abduction. Blom's supervisor at the veterans' home where he worked stated that he had never seen Blom's real name, as he went by the alias Hutchinson, and was unaware of his criminal record. Colleagues described Blom as a loner who kept to himself. After his arrest, Blom initially cooperated with authorities but soon requested an attorney and refused to testify. Meanwhile, authorities conducted searches that yielded several items from Blom's home, but no official statement was made about what they found. Meanwhile, the search party resumed their efforts on the second day with increased enthusiasm. Katie's mother remained hopeful that her daughter was alive. On Donald Blom's property, fragments resembling bone were found in a fire pit's ashes. The fragments were sent to a lab and confirmed to be bone. A tooth was also found and sent to forensic dentist Dr. and Norlander for analysis. She used alternative methods to verify the tooth's origin, as DNA in the pulp would have been destroyed. A filling confirmed it was human and matched those used for Katie. Researchers identified it as a young woman's tooth, making it likely to belong to Katie. Katie Poirier's kidnapper, Blom, was charged with kidnapping and unlawful possession of a firearm, a federal offense due to his prior convictions. He was initially unwilling to consider a plea agreement, but later changed his mind, agreeing to testify on the condition that he be allowed to call home on September 8. During his confession, Blom recounted the events of May 26, 1999, stating that he had gone fishing and then returned to his home in Richfield, only to drive back to his Moose Lake residence. On his way, he stopped at a bar for a beer and saw Katie in a store while she was conducting business. Blom, who did not know Katie, grabbed her and forced her into his pickup truck. He then drove her to his home, where he strangled her to death from behind, a process that took approximately 20 minutes. Blom claimed that he did not commit any other type of assault on Katie. After killing her, he placed her body in a fire pit, gathered wood and paper, and attempted to burn her remains. However, Blom's account of the events was inconsistent with the video camera footage and the evidence found in the burn pit. According to Blom, Katie had asked him several times to let her go, but she did not struggle with him until he began choking her. Blom stated that he managed to kill Katie with his bare hands, but his recollection of the events was unclear and contradictory. Blom's account of burning Katie's remains was not believable. He claimed that he had burned her body to ashes using only wood and paper, but this was not possible. When questioned further, Blom admitted that he didn't know why he had made this claim, as it didn't make sense to him. After the interview, Blom contacted 2 local TV stations to report his confession and asked them to leave his family alone. As part of his plea deal, his wife was returned several confiscated items, including a parcel of land, a home, and the family car. However, Blom's confession caused significant distress for the Poirier family, who had been holding on to hope that Katie was still alive. Blom later recanted his confession, stating that it was false and made under duress. He claimed that the isolation of solitary confinement and the medication he was taking had caused him to hallucinate, leading him to tell the authorities what he thought they wanted to hear. A plea bargain was no longer an option, and both the prosecution and defense teams were getting ready for trial. It's not uncommon for people to falsely confess to a crime, and this can happen in a few ways. One type of false confession occurs when someone gives in to pressure from the police or interrogation and admits to a crime they didn't commit. Another type of false confession can occur when people are led to believe by the police that they have committed a crime, even if they didn't, and eventually they start to believe it themselves. Blom's trial began in June 2000 with a 5-week jury selection. The trial itself lasted another 5 weeks with numerous witnesses, including several crucial ones. Assistant Prosecutor Thomas Perler presented the case, and Blom's brother was an initial witness. He testified that he gave Blom a New York Yankees jersey, contradicting Blom's earlier claim that he never owned such a jersey, raising questions about potential perjury. More testimony came from 2 women who had been kidnapped by Blom in 1983. They bravely testified about the harm he had inflicted upon them, providing the jury with a first-hand account of Blom's capabilities. Notably, the women's appearances at the time of the kidnapping bore a resemblance to Katie's. Forensic experts specializing in dental evidence analyzed the partial tooth and confirmed that it matched Katie's age, gender, in dental records. Doctor and Norlander, who had initially been uncertain whether the object was even a tooth, testified that the tooth belonged to Katie. The defense called its first witness on August 7th. Amy Blom, Blom's wife, testified that her husband was at home the night Katie disappeared. From the stand, Amy explained that she inferred her husband's whereabouts after seeing a news broadcast about Katie's disappearance the next day. The location of the disappearance was near their country house on Moose Lake, 110 miles from their home. Given her husband's prior convictions, Amy assumed he would be a suspect, which is why she later recalled his exact location the night before. Blom arrived home at 9:30 p.m. to find his wife already in bed. The next morning, his spouse was still at home, having gotten up to start the day, and she had already made coffee. Blom's spouse also took the stand to testify about her experience with the police officers who had questioned her. She described how they had bullied her, implying that if she didn't answer their questions the way they wanted her to, they would take her children away. She further stated that the officers called her a liar. Additionally, when asked about a baseball jersey, she denied having seen her husband wear one or receiving one from her son-in-law among the clothes he had given them. As she gave her testimony, Blom became visibly emotional, crying and wiping away tears. On August 10th, Blom testified in his own defense. Under oath, he denied kidnapping Katie Poirier. During his 3-hour testimony, he alternated between speaking and crying, claiming his life was in shambles and that he was ill at the time of the crime. Blom admitted to the investigation that he had committed the crime, but later recanted his confession. He tried to gain sympathy from the jury by portraying himself as the victim, claiming he was under distress due to media pressure and his wife's threat to leave him. Blom changed his alibi, now stating that he was not at Moose Lake on the night of the crime. Instead, he claimed he was asleep at home with his wife, as she had previously stated. He admitted to being at Moose Lake earlier that evening but claimed to have returned home by 10 p.m. before Katie's disappearance. Appearing in court ultimately had no benefit for Donald Blom. Many perceived him as someone trying to dodge responsibility for his actions once again. At the conclusion of the questioning, Blom expressed frustration and made a last-ditch request to the judge, but it was denied. The case was then presented to the jury. Following a lengthy 10-hour deliberation, which included a 3-hour review of the recorded confessions, the jury found Donald Blom guilty of the crime. He received a sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole. Consuelo and 3 other friends, including Consuelo's boyfriend, set off for Puken. The trip was smooth, and upon arrival, the group stayed in separate accommodations, with they staying in a summer house owned by the Uribe family. After 8 p.m., they got ready to head to a party at Black Room, a well-known spot that promised an unforgettable night. Before leaving, Antonia texted her dad, who reminded her to be careful around people she didn't know. Antonia assured him that being cautious was second nature to her. They had a great time chatting and dancing with friends. As fate would have it, Martin and Antonia unexpectedly ran into each other at the club. They were thrilled to see each other and spent the evening together, chatting and dancing. Throughout the night, Antonia would occasionally leave Martin's side to check in with her friend and greet other male acquaintances she had met while bar hopping. However, she didn't realize how much she had been drinking, likely due to the long drive and her empty stomach. This was unusual for her, as she normally didn't let herself get carried away with alcohol. Consuelo told Antonia it was time to leave the club, but Antonia was having too much fun and refused to go. Consuelo warned her to stop drinking and think about leaving, but Antonia was determined to stay. Despite Consuelo's concerns, Antonia chose to stay at the club, and Consuelo left without her. However, Antonia would soon come to regret her decision. One of their friends stayed at the club and saw what happened next. He later shared what he saw during the investigation and in court. He said that Martin started talking to Antonia and then took her hand, leading her towards the exit. Antonia seemed unsure and confused, likely because she had been drinking too much. Although she was in a daze, Antonia didn't seem to resist or mind being led away. It was unclear if she even knew what was happening. But external surveillance footage told a different story. According to Martin's friends, they left the club in two. Antonia tried to respond normally to his light-hearted question about whether she had been drinking too much. However, her response unintentionally revealed her distress. In a related development, Martin's original lawyers resigned on March 16th, and the public defense took over his case. The second trial began on April 24, 2024, focusing on 5 counts of violence and 2 counts of forced intimacy. During the trial, Martin waived his right to remain silent and provided his account of the events. He claimed that his actions were the result of severe intoxication. However, the prosecutor countered that by drinking with the victims, he had taken advantage of their vulnerability. Ultimately, Martin was found guilty on July 7, 2023. The federal prosecution sought a prison sentence of 41 years, but on July 28, 2023, Martin only was sentenced to 17 years in prison for committing 7 intimacy-related crimes against 6 victims. Since he had already spent time in custody, he would serve 14 years.